Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Planning, Building, and Environmental Committee. My name is Joanne Cheek-Jock, and I am the chair of the committee. In order to proceed forward, I want to say one thing, and that is that tonight we are audio and video taping this meeting, and it will be available on the town's website within 48 hours of tonight's meeting. Also, we'd like to ask each and all of you to turn off all your cell phones, pagers, PDAs, or at least put them on silent so that they won't disrupt either the flow of the meeting or the people surrounding you. Thank you. I'm going to ask now for changes in order of items on the agenda. Seeing none, I will move now to disclosure of pecuniary interest and/or conflict. Members of committee? Seeing none, then the clerk will so note, and we'll move on to public meetings under the Planning Act. There are three this evening, two normal and one public meeting regarding the naming of a street. Okay, so with the first one, that is a zoning bylaw amendment for B&A Heaslip Farms, which is a zoning bylaw amendment, and the Planning Act requires under section 34 sub 12 that before the passing of a zoning bylaw amendment, council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect to the amendment. The purpose of this meeting is to receive additional comments and answer questions regarding from the public regarding the amendment to the Township of West Lincoln's zoning bylaw. At this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendment, and any comments received will be taken into account by committee and council for their consideration. The Planning Act also requires that under section 34 sub 13 that council advise the public that if a person or public body does not make an oral submission at the public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of West Lincoln before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of this committee and council to the Ontario Municipal Board. Madam Clerk, could you please advise of the method and dates by which this public meeting was advertised?
Proper notice was given by way of individual notice date at May 11th, 2017.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With regard to this proposal, I understand that Mr. Treble will be leading off to explain the reasoning and purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment.
Madam Chair, I'm actually going to ask Fred to give it over to
Empowerment, I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Joanne, I got the picture on the laptop.
Okay.
You told me to bug you.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. So application for rezoning has been made by Pam Heaslip on behalf of B&A Heaslip Farms on their property located in the former township of Gainsborough, municipally known as 5041 Alka Road, as seen on the overhead projector and on the screens in front of you. This application is related to a surplus farm severance application, B7 2017 WL, through the Committee of Adjustment, scheduled to go before the committee next week, June 21st. So no decision has been made by the Committee of Adjustment yet for this actual severance. The surplus farm severance application proposes to sever off the surplus dwelling with 1 acre of land and 42.3 acres of land being retained by the farmers for continued agricultural use. Provincial and local planning policy requires that when a surplus farm severance is completed, the remnant parcel of the agricultural land must be rezoned to restrict any future residential development. So the application before you proposes to rezone the retained 42.3 acres of land to agricultural purposes only, with an exception to recognize a deficient lot area because what is required is 100 acres, and what we have here is 42.3 acres. And the rezoning application would also rezone the severed 1 acre residential parcel to rural residential RUR. Future staff report will provide a recommendation to this committee on this application following any input received at tonight's meeting or the upcoming Committee of Adjustment meeting or by any agencies or departments.
Is that the completion of your presentation, Mr. Boersma? Thank you very much. Okay, is the applicant or an authorized agent for this file here wishing to make a presentation to committee?
Here, but we don't need to present anymore. He's said everything.
Okay, so you agree with the presentation as made by staff, and that's sufficient for your needs. Thank you. Are there any members of the public here tonight wishing to make presentation regarding the zoning bylaw amendment here before us? I stress that at this point, this may be the only public meeting held with respect to this application. Therefore, if any members of the public would like to make comments and/or provide written comments, they should state them now, or present them, or presenting them at the OMB may not be considered. So I'll ask one more time, are there any members of the public here wishing to make representation to committee? Seeing none, I'll move to confining it to table and ask members of committee if anyone on the committee wishes to ask questions or have clarification on this issue. Seeing none, please be advised that this is a technical report that is being considered tonight by the Planning Committee, and that a recommendation report will be forthcoming to a future Planning Committee and ultimately to a council meeting. Please be advised that once Planning and Council have made their decision with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment, a notice of its passing will be circulated with an appeal period. Pardon me. There is an attendance sheet, sign-in sheet, which is located on the table near the exit doors, which we ask all present to sign. If you wish to receive information regarding tonight's meetings, please place a check mark in the column marked B&A Heaslip Farms, and you will be advised of any subsequent meetings and/or decisions on this matter. So therefore, people who are interested in observing council and/or committee meetings about a particular bylaw should not solely rely on mailed notices and thus miss the opportunity to attend the meetings. It is suggested that you watch the township's website for posting of agendas to review items that will be discussed at council and/or committee meetings. The agendas for meetings are posted on the township website at approximately 4 p.m. on the Friday prior to the meeting. Additionally, meetings scheduled are also noted on the website for public view. If you wish to receive notices by mail, it is suggested that you include your email address with your mailing address and your phone number on the attendance sign-in sheet. And as I stated, we wish that all members of the public here tonight sign the attendance sheet, and that if you wish to receive information pertaining to a public meeting or materials in the agenda, if you would tick the appropriate column, we'll ensure that to do our best to get that information to you. So I declare this public meeting closed at 6:39. So the second public meeting. Second public meeting is a zoning bylaw amendment by application made by Leonard and Lynn Snippa, Mitch and Elise Snippa. This public meeting is a zoning bylaw amendment application. Planning Act requires under Section 34, Sub 12, that before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect to that amendment. The purpose of this public meeting is to receive comments and answer questions from the public regarding the amendment to the Township of West Lincoln zoning bylaw. At this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendment, and any comments received tonight will be taken into consideration by this committee. The Planning Act also requires, through Section 34, Sub 13, that council advise the public that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or written submissions to the Township of West Lincoln before the passing of a bylaw, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of this council or committee to the Ontario Municipal Board. Madam Clerk, could you please advise of the method and dates by which notice was given?
Proper notice was given by way of individual notice dated May 11, 2017.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this evening, Mr. Boersma, again, you'll be advising us as to the purpose and reasoning behind this application, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Joanne, or Mrs. Deputy Clerk, thanks. So application for rezoning has been made by Leonard and Lynn Snippa, as well as Mitch and Elise Snippa, all of which are bona fide farmers, for their property located in the former township of Gainsborough, located on the northwest corner of Port Davidson Road and Bismarck Road, municipally known as 1586 Port Davidson Road, and it's on the screens again in front of you. This application has been submitted to fulfill a condition of consent for a surplus farm severance application B4 2017 WL, granted by the Committee of Adjustment April 19th, 2017. This application severed off a surplus residential dwelling with 1.67 acres to be used for residential purposes from a 100-acre parcel now being 98.3 acres. So this rezoning is required as a condition of consent to rezone the retained 98.3 acres of land to agricultural purposes only, and to rezone the severed 1.67 acre residential lot to rural residential with a site-specific exception to recognize that the house is a little bit too close to the road, being 10.1 meters where 15 meters is required. A future staff report will provide a recommendation to this committee on this application following any input received here tonight or by any other input received by agencies or other departments. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Boersma. And it's nice to hear that that road is Bismarck Road. It's also Regional 65 and or Silver Street for any of those people living out that way. But it's all the same. Is the applicant or an authorized agent on behalf of the applicant here wishing to speak this evening? That's fine. Now I'm asking, is there anyone here from the public wishing to make a submission with regard to this application? This may be the only public meeting with respect to this application. Therefore, if any members of the public would like to make comments and or provide written comments, they should state them now or present them, as the OMB may not consider comments made during any other committee or council meeting. So I'll ask one more time, is there anyone here from the public wishing to make comment with regard to the application for zoning bylaw amendment of Leonard and Lynn Snippa, as well as Mitch and Elise Snippa? Seeing none, I will confine to table. Are there any members of committee wishing to make comment? Councillor, now you see that? Give me a week off and I don't know. Councillor Bilsma.
Thank you very much. Just, the picture's dated, correct? There's a building showing that's now transected on the picture, but it doesn't exist anymore. It's been regraded and it's, okay. So that building's been removed or somewhat.
Mr. Boersma, would you like to speak to that item?
Yes, please, through you, Madam Chair. The majority of that building has been removed, except for the old dairy portion of the building. And that's what comes up as the metal-clad building on the survey sketch. And there was a condition as part of the severance application that that structure be checked over by the building inspector to make sure that it is safe for use of residential use.
Okay, and then, so as it remains, it falls within the setbacks, the 6.25, 6.33, and the 9, those are all sufficient setbacks for the boundary. Sometimes I get the feeling that we're like, slathering butter down the sides of these things and trying to make them as small as possible. We want to make sure that there's sufficient room to make it a decent parcel of land. So, through you, Madam Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe the setback requirement for an accessory building on a rural residential lot is 1.2 meters, so they do have a bit extra, and that was mainly because there's a concrete cistern right beside that building that actually services the house, which we needed to make sure got on the property, so the house had adequate water servicing.
Okay. No further.
You're good? Thank you. Mayor Joyner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Mr. Treble, please, Director. Mr. Treble, is this not the report where the MPCA also makes comments, or is that the next report?
Through you, Madam Chair, the NPCA often makes comment at the time of the severance in these particular applications. I don't have the file with me. I would anticipate they did in this case as well. I'm not sure, is there a specific point that you're
Looking to.
referring to?
No,
in
there
terms of
isn't. I
concerns?
was just wondering why I couldn't remember if this is where they actually do the report, or is it the following report?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just perhaps for some clarity then. Usually what happens when it comes to a severance, the severance goes through the Committee of Adjustment first, and that is where the Conservation Authority and the region provide their comments. And if the zoning is implementing what the Committee of Adjustment was considering, then they don't provide the same comments again. Heaslip was slightly reversed in order in the sense that you're hearing the you're hearing the rezoning before the severance, which is next week. So I'm not sure if there were comments from the Conservation Authority on that one, but in this case, they were with the severance a couple of months ago.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I am asked to say that, to remind committee, or members of the public, that this is a technical report being considered by Planning Committee this evening, and a recommendation report will be forthcoming to a committee and/or council meeting in the near future with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment. If approved by council, a notice of its passing will be circulated with an appeal period. As with the previous public meeting, an attendance sign-in sheet is located at the table near the exit doors, which all present to sign. If you wish to be informed of any future comments or reports regarding this particular severance, please check in the column marked SNIPA, and you will be advised of any subsequent meetings and/or decisions on the matter. People who are interested in observing council or committee meeting discussions about a particular bylaw should not solely rely on mailed notices and thus miss the opportunity to attend meetings. It is suggested that you watch the township's website for posting of agendas to review items that will be discussed at a committee and/or council meeting. The agendas for meetings are posted on the township's website at approximately 4 p.m. on the Friday prior to the meeting. Additionally, meeting schedules are also noted on the town website for public to view. If you wish to receive notices by email, it is suggested that you include your email address with your mailing address and your phone number on the attendance sign-in sheet. I declare this public meeting closed at 6:49. Pardon me. Okay. We have a third public meeting this evening, which is this public meeting is being held in accordance with the Municipal Act SO 2001, Chapter 25, in the Township of West Lincoln's procedural bylaw and street naming policy, being policy POL-PD 0111. The Township of West Lincoln's procedural bylaw states that any matter pertaining to the naming of a highway and/or private road in a plan of subdivision or a plan of condominium for which notice is required to be given, notice shall be published at least once. The date of the publication being at least 7 days prior to the committee meeting indicated in the notice. Public notice of this meeting was given through advertising in a paper with general circulation dated May 23, 2017. The purpose of this evening's public meeting is to inform of council's and committee's intent to receive comments regarding the naming of a street in the Stepping Stones plan of condominium being either Severino Circle or Vienna Circle. A bylaw will be passed at a later date to officially name the street in Stepping Stones plan of condominium. Mr. Treble, I believe you're making comment with regard to this particular report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I am. This is a slightly different public meeting than we've had in a bit of time. So I'll just go through a little bit of additional background first, and then we can discuss the proposal. The township has a policy that applies to street naming, and the current version of the policy that is in effect in the township is one that was dated July of 2011, which has a list of suggested names attached, and a policy along with that that suggests that at least 50% of the names in a plan of subdivision or a plan of condominium should be removed or should be taken from the list of names. That particular list was prepared by the Heritage Committee several years ago, and there was some direction given by Township Planning Committee probably a couple of years ago to go back and revisit that list and refine it and make sure that we have all of the names of veterans and
Events.
sort of heritage families and whatnot on the list. And the Heritage Committee was working on that. And there is a revised list you'll see that's attached to the report, attached to a memo from the chair of the Heritage Committee. They have a revised list, but as I understand it, that list has never really been endorsed by committee and has not come to our committee as of yet, mainly because of challenges they've had with quorum from time to time. So they've certainly worked on a revised list, and you will be seeing that revised list before you at some point in the near future. So the challenge in this case is there is a plan of condominium that has been approved. Committee and council approved the plan of condominium several months ago. One of the conditions was a street naming if necessary. And this particular plan of condo, the 911 experts in the township have determined that the best way to assign numbers to the units in this development are actually to assign them as units on an internal street. So unlike Atwater, as an example, as a plan of condo, which all of the units are 37 Brookside, and then you have unit number 1, 2, 3, this particular development, you will know of the unit number by whatever street name is assigned, and then house 2, 4, 6, whatever house number they assign, you know, evens on one side, odds on another will be the way this one unfolds, which is the same as the Griffin Place development on Shirley Road was recently approved. That one is under the name of Richard Crescent, being the Richard Griffin being the former or the early settler of the Smithville area. So in this case, there's been a determination by staff that only one name is required, and since 50% have to be taken off the list, the applicant has given us two names, one being Severino Circle, the other being Vienna Circle, Vienna being on the list, Severino being the preferred name by the applicant, but not on the list. So the public meeting process is considering both names at this point in time, and I guess from some respects, staff are looking for a bit of direction in terms of which name committee and council might be prepared to entertain for this development, if those names or something different, I suppose. So under the procedural bylaw, as has been noted, the requirement is that we provide notice of the proposal to name the street, and this is a condition of approval of the development that the street name be assigned so that proper 911 addressing can be given to these units. I think that's it for now, Madam Chair.
Mr. Treble, just as a point of clarification, you said Severino or Vienna, but this committee and council could choose a different name from the list. We're not bound by anything here. These are recommendations coming from the applicant.
These are the applicant's requests that he has brought forward, that's correct.
Okay. One from the list and one other.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is the applicant and or their agent present to provide comments regarding these names? Sorry, I was losing my throat there.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Mr. Mayor, members of the committee. John Arians from the IBI Group here on behalf of Catalina Construction. I think it goes without saying why Mr. Severino is preferring Severino Circle over Vienna. Obviously, he's a long-term resident of this municipality. He developed a Streamside subdivision, which now holds some 75, 80 single-family homes and 60 townhouses, and of course the new school that will soon be open. Mr. Severino's request is simple. He has a strong connection to this property, and as a Smithville West Lincoln resident. He just wants to establish a bit of a legacy. It's a private road within a private condominium development, and hence his request for Severino Circle. So I'm sure you will consider that, and we look forward to seeing the recommendation report that comes hopefully at your next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arians. Are there any other members of the public at this point wishing to speak with regard to the street naming in a plan of condominium, and the two options being Severino Circle and/or Vienna Circle at this moment? Seeing none, I will confine it to table. Mayor Joyner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Treble. Mr. Treble, what is the history of this property going back before the Severino family has owned it? And what I want to know really is the name Vienna, does it have any significance to this property over the years?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would need to do some research to be able to confirm, but I don't believe Vienna has anything to do with this property, but it was on the heritage list, but I don't think specific to this site. That would be my thought off the top. I would want to confirm that, though, Madam Chair, just to be sure.
Thank you. That's it? Okay. Councilor Rayner, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My grandfather immigrated to Canada from Vienna, Austria in 1929, and my grandmother and my father came in 1932. My farm is registered federally as Vienna Farms, so I would be quite happy to agree with Mr. Arians. And the history is important, and in this particular case, there's a lot involved, and a resident of the Township of West Lincoln, and has done a lot in the community with regards to this. And Vienna to me is kind of special, and as Mr. Treble says, I don't believe there is the connection to the township that there is with the other name. So I would be quite comfortable to support Mr. Arians on his request. Thank you.
Thank you. In one of the names proposed. Thank you. I have a speakers list, and I have Councillor Ganan.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm wondering if Mr. Arians is aware of any connection that Mr. Severino had with the name Vienna, or whether he just happened to choose another name from the list that he happened to like.
Mr. Arians, if you'd like to come forward to answer that question. If there is no answer.
If there's no answer, that's fine, but I wondered where that other choice came from.
I think the choice came from the list that appealed to Mr. Severino as opposed to some of the others on the list, but there really was no connection to the name Vienna that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bilsma.
Thank you. My question, just basically in terms of procedure, we have two names, so exactly how do we proceed with one, or will somebody make a motion to put one forward, and if it's defeated, the other one automatically comes forward, or is it just a point of procedure? So
I believe we're in the public meeting at the moment, so it's just to get comment and learn from the public.
okay, so we won't actually be picking the name tonight.
Yes, later on.
Madam Chair, my thought would be that I would at least like to see sort of a preference from individual committee members, if that is possible. Voting inside the public process would not be appropriate, but
No.
certainly a preference would be ideal.
Right. The first thing is in a public meeting is to gather information from the public and see if there's any comment. As you can see, there's a preference by the developer, but at this point in time, it's appropriate if you wish to make comment regarding your preference. But no, we will not be holding a vote at this public meeting. We'll do that subsequent to the public meeting.
Okay. Then further, and it should be noted that I'm on the Heritage Committee, so I was involved in making the list, and so my preference is the one that's on the list, so Vienna would be my preference.
Thank you.
Obviously no slight to Mr. Severino, but yeah.
No
Fair enough.
problem.
Good, thanks.
Councillor Bill, not to put you on the spot, did I see your hand? Oh, okay, wait. Sorry, I apologize. Okay. Well, I wanted to maintain my comments till last, but I can, my comments, if you don't mind, Councillor Bill, and I'll be happy to take yours. I know that this item came forward of street naming, not with regard to any specific subdivision and or condominium, but some time ago, we ran into a conundrum with street names and the availability of heritage names. And thank you to Councillor Bilsma, who sits on Heritage, and I was going to say that, for getting the ball rolling on putting together the preferred list. That still needs community input, which was something we looked for, and it also needs to be vetted through this committee and/or council. I would really like to see us be able to engender, before we get to any kind of additional growth that may happen in the new secondary plan area with naming of streets. I'd like to know that committee, council, the public have all seen a comprehensive list of the names that are out there, those that are heritage-oriented, those that are community-oriented, and we have a list that is readily available for developers to choose from. So I will go and I will defer at the appropriate time to the list that makes up what we do. We did at previous times, we talked about names that were there in respect to people who had either given their life or given a particular historical aspect to the community, but that we wouldn't look to naming streets or anything with people who might be still among us for various and sundry reasons, including the fact that we were providing dignity. We didn't want to have favoritism suggested by anything that we were doing. So with that, I've finished my comments. I think Councillor Bell wanted to speak first, and then you, Councillor Trombetta.
Through you, Madam Chair. I guess my thoughts are that I've heard that we're looking to update this list. It's in the process of being updated. It has a lot of history, obviously, the way it is. But also, the names that are on the list are not just for the people that have passed, but also for the living. And Mr. Severino does have ties to our community. And without getting into a whole lot, I don't have a problem naming a street within a private complex after him. It's not like we're naming a street in West Lincoln after him. It's in a complex that he's developing himself. So his request is, in my opinion, reasonable. And at the appropriate time, we'll address it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Trombetta.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, and I understand your point of trying to be transparent, but we also have Georgia Caucus Way, which is also named
And
after,
Anastasia and a number of others.
Yeah, there's many that are named after a developer that has developed this lands. So being transparent, you know what, and then just help me out here. So if the Heritage Committee, it comes to us, these two names, or the Heritage Committee comes to final two, how does it really work?
So in respect to that, the reason that we went through the process that we're still in the midst of and hasn't been dealt with is because of those kind of namings that occurred. And there was some dispute with, not with regard to Georgia Caucus and or any of those names, but there was a dispute about another name that was out there. And so we charged staff with working on an acceptable street naming list that then was to be vetted by the Historical Society. Committee, the Heritage Committee. I apologize for that. And was to come back to us. So we are ripe to see those lists back to us probably in the fall now.
So pardon me, Madam Chair, so previously that didn't happen. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, it was an issue that, those issues that brought us to the place that we're at with creating a list.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
To the best of my recollection, Mr. Treble, I think I'm correct.
Madam Chair, I would agree. The list that's currently in effect is from 2011. That is about the time that there was some concern about one of the names proposed by another developer in town. And the policy, which is actually in your documents as one of the attachments, has in bold a change that happened in 2011 to try and address one of that concern, or one of those concerns. And then subsequent to that, there was direction given by Planning Committee to take a look at the names, asking the Heritage Committee to revisit the list, refine the list, ensure the list is complete, and put together a bit of a consultation strategy to reach out to the community. But with changes in committee since then and changes in staff since then, that hasn't kicked off yet. But I think it's safe to say that by fall, the Heritage Committee should be able to bring back a proposal with a revised list and perhaps a consultation approach as well.
Thank you.
no food.
No, I'm just looking. So we've heard from all members of committee. Mayor Joyner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Treble, in the future, is it possible that we can have a little bit of research done on these properties so that we can at least know what names have owned that property for a long period of time?
Through you, Madam Chair, I've never done a title search that shows every ownership change, but if that's something that's desired of committee,
We might ask for that from the developer.
There's
That-
a
that
certainly
they can do
cost.
the research, look back and
Yeah.
give us the ownership changes that have occurred so that we can have some of that information as they bring it forward.
The one thing, Madam Chair, at an appropriate point in time, I was thinking I would pop back to my office. The historical atlas for Lincoln County is in my office. I can look at that, and that gives us a snapshot at one point in time back in 1878 or whatever year that was. So we can certainly, I can probably, before this night is over, tell you what name shows on the mapping at that point in time.
That would be great.
But if we want the history of ownership since
Odd was-
first conveyance, we can certainly investigate and report back on that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. And certainly, if it's dated 1857, some of us may not have even been born then, so thank you. Okay. I think we've exhausted the comments with regard to the circle, so this is a technical report that is being considered by Planning Committee this evening, and that a recommendation report will be forthcoming to a future planning and/or committee, a council meeting, sorry. Everyone is invited to stay in attendance to hear the committee's comments and/or recommendations with respect to naming the street and stepping stones being either Severino or Vienna, which will take place shortly following the conclusion of the public meeting. Additionally, there is a sign-in sheet which is located at the table near the exit doors, which we would ask that all present sign, that would be all present sign, but that if you wish to receive information with regarding to any of the public meetings this evening, if you would place a tick mark in the last column, in the column in which you are most interested, we will ensure that you are advised of any future meetings and/or decisions regarding each of those matters. I call this public meeting closed at 7:08. Just for the record, for anybody who's new, and some people only attend a spattering of public meetings, and not to suggest that that's not appropriate. Public meetings are a more formal part of our planning committee meetings, and we follow a rigor because of the ability of anyone involved in that public meeting and the public at large to appeal the decisions that this committee and/or council will ultimately make. So we follow a process, and our clerk is very careful. Our clerks are very careful to keep us within the laws to ensure that we repeat the information after every one of the public meetings so that you're aware of your rights, and/or anyone watching this meeting at home are aware of their rights and can take action or can be at a future meeting if required. So it may sound repetitive, and you may see it different in other communities, but this is our process. This is how we do it. And hopefully you feel comfortable when you're leaving the room that you'll be advised, and if you sign in, you will get information required. So, having said that, we're now concluding the public meetings for this evening and moving on to the second part of our meeting, which is appointments. And we have a few tonight, and each of the appointments have a maximum of 10 minutes, and I believe that we'll have a few in addition to what's on here, because there are people here addressing an item on the agenda, and they are the representatives for that particular item. So the first item is item P71-17, which is the Niagara Christian Gleaners regarding their business plan and a PowerPoint presentation. I believe, Klaus?
Good evening, Madam Chair, Mayor Joyner, and the other committee members. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to give a presentation here. If I may, I would like to introduce a few of my fellow board members. The first one is Ed Veenstra from Dills Road, who lives close to Dunville. Secondly, beside him is Otto Bulk, formerly owner of Rosa Flora Greenhouse. He is from Dunville area also. And Ed Feenstra is president or chairman of the board. And then Teresa van Oenie, she comes from the Lowbanks area. She is our secretary. Ed Bouwman and Joe from Cambro and Joe Bach from Wainfleet could not make it tonight. They would like to be excused. And then we have Adrian Dieleman, who is going to do the presentation for us tonight. He did many for the Ontario Christian Gleaners, all the way from Toronto to Welland, and in between. He did it for many years. He is the vice chair of our board. So he'll take over.
Welcome this evening. So this is a presentation by the Niagara Christian Gleaners about their projects throughout Ontario with regard to developing opportunities to recycle and use foods. So we're happy to have you here this evening, and we're anxious to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Your statement is at least partially correct.
Okay.
I'll go through it and
But that's why you're here, to
put
completely
some
correct
additional
me.
information in. So the slides, most of the slides I will be using are from the Ontario Christian Gleaners, which is located in Cambridge. My wife and myself have been involved with them as volunteers for 9 years, and we do not have ourselves here in operation yet, so therefore we have not got any places to take pictures from. Hence we use with their knowledge, and much appreciated, of course, we use their slides. So basically what the Gleaners do is, let me just back up for a minute. The Gleaner concept was started in BC, was developed from a somewhat similar but a different concept in California. They were the first ones who started in a building, and we have copied their concept. The Ontario Christian Gleaners, and I'm saying we, I'm talking about them, and I talk about us. So the Ontario Christian Gleaners have copied their concept, and they put up a building, and they start operating in 2008. So most of the slides which we are using are actually taken from inside and outside their building. Basically what we do is we address two very important issues. Shortage of food and starvation because of lack of food in other parts of the world, and a tremendous waste of food in the Western world. And this slide here, if you can see, it shows that if the annual food waste was all piled up, you would end up as a mountain 2.5 kilometers across and 3 kilometers high, and that would be your annual food waste. On top of this travesty, it also has another effect on the environment, namely, it is the third highest producer of gases, greenhouse gases, which are very bad for the environment. And that is because of the wasted energy which it produces this food which is not being used. While you can see here, 21,000 people die every day because of hunger or hunger-related diseases. We hope to start an operation soon here, and we are confident that there is still lots of food which is not going to be eaten available in our area. We may have to go a little bit further than just our immediate Niagara area, and we will process it similar to what we do in Cambridge, and we will make it into a dried soup mix, and this will be made available to mission organizations. So what the Gleaners in Cambridge does, they have established contacts with growers and wholesalers, and they pick up any of the leftover produce, or actually they ask them to deliver it to them to save them the cost of picking it up. And we process it, and the processing entails washing it if necessary, cutting out any bad parts, and drying it, and then storing it until we're ready to mix it with all kinds of other vegetables into a soup mix. Because it is dried, and we pack it in a sealed plastic bag. It has a 2.5-year shelf life, which is important because, of course, it will go overseas. We could not send any of our fresh leftover produce because before it is out of the country or out of the warehouse, it would have spoiled. But the dried food will stay good because it has a long shelf life. We bring the moisture content down from 90% as it goes in the dryer down to about 10 to 15%. It makes it lighter, it's cheaper to ship, but also it will give you that long shelf life. Cleaning is, of course, a biblical concept. It's been around for many years, and there are a number of places in the Bible where the Lord teaches us and commands the people from the Old Testament to not harvest to the very corner, but leave some there for the poor and the destitute and the needy. This is the building in Cambridge, which has had 2 expansions already since it started in 2008, and then it is now at the maximum size it can go. Each day they take in food that would normally go to waste. So this would be produce which comes from a farmer because he may grow more than he needs for the customer. So what he will do typically is take the best 2/3 of the crop and the other 2/3 which he does not need, he'll give to us. He will harvest it and he will call us, tell us it's available for pickup, or he will deliver it to us. And the big growers, they would have their own trucking facilities available, they will bring it to us. And it comes in large volumes. We also get it from food terminals and food distribution centers because they may have produce which has a best before date on. And if it gets too close to the best before date while it is still in the warehouse and not gone to the store, they will not take it to the store because they would have to pick it back up again and take it back. So they will call us and they'll tell us they have this, and would you like to have it? And we'll say yes, and they'll bring it to us. Us, again, being the Ontario Christian Cleaners, we hope they'll do the same thing to us, us being now the Niagara Christian Cleaners once we're in operation. It is run by volunteers. No, that's not true, sorry. It is run by a paid manager with 2 part-time people, and we have volunteers coming in every day, 5 days a week, in the morning only, and they will put in their 3 hours approximately, and during the time they process from 2,000 to 5,000 pounds of fresh produce every day. That does not mean that every day this comes in, but it will be the average coming in during the 200 days about that we will be in operation. About volunteers, we have about 80 volunteers coming in every day, and then we have over 2,000 volunteers coming in annually. We keep track of this just for interest's sake, and that's how high the number is, and it keeps on going up. And I'm sure we can do just as well here in the Niagara region because there are a lot of people who are very enthused about this concept. Here are the name tags of the people who are not there when this picture was taken. As I said, we have over 2,000 different volunteers coming in over the year. They work together on tables, and of course our setup might be somewhat similar to what you see here. 4-tool table, plastic cutting board. Produce is brought in after it is washed. We remove any bad pieces, cut them to sizes no larger than 4 inches, and then it is ready for the next step. Prepared for the dicer. That's the machine where we dump it in, and it comes out as small cubes, 4 to 8 millimeters in size, depending on what it is, as to what size we cut it to. We cut them to the right size to give us the quickest possible drying time. To use it at the most efficiency, the shorter we can bring the shorter we can make the drying time, the less energy it takes, the more we can process. It is then stored in barrels in a warehouse until we have enough of a variety to mix it into a soup mix which usually contains from 10 to 15 different ingredients, including salt and lentils. Here they are doing the mixing, and it is put in a container. It's collected in a container and put in a plastic bag, which is heat sealed, and this is what gives you the 2.5-year shelf life. Then they are put in square plastic pails or round barrels. We put pails and barrels on a skid, and in both cases, the skid would contain 240 bags of food. And each bag of food is good for 100 servings of soup. List of the countries where the product, the soup mix goes to, and this is only a small list because the actual list from day one is about 35 or 40 different countries it has gone through throughout the world. Once it is delivered to the final destination, the bag is put in 25 liters of water, soaked for about 6 hours, bring it to a boil for about an hour and a half, let it simmer for another hour or two, let it cool off, ready to serve. So one bag of 3 pounds gives you 100 servings of soup, more or less. If you want something thicker than what you would get with this, you just put the same contents in a smaller amount of water, as is being done when you use it for topping for rice or potatoes, etc. So our goal is to be in operation in 2018. If we get a speedy approval for property, we should be able to do it. We can start building, but this is what we really like to do. And as I said, we are looking for a property. What we need, and as soon as we do have a property and we got the permits, we'll start looking for equipment also. A major piece is what you see here, that is the actual dryer. And this is a piece of equipment which is special made for us. It's custom made, you could call it, and it takes about 7 months to 8 months to get the thing completely built to our specs and delivered. Plus, it has a price tag of $175,000, more or less, reflecting the time it takes to build it. You can help us by donating. That is not just to your people, although you're welcome to donate also, of course. We are doing some fundraising, and I think we'll be okay once we get the approval for a property. For I was hungry, etc. Again, as I said, the Lord has commended us to take care of the needy and those who are hungry. Did I miss anything, dear?
Andrew?
Yes, thank you. I missed that.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
We do not ship this overseas. It is made available to mission organizations. They have to apply. If they are approved, then they can pick up their requested amount. They are responsible for collecting it, for storing it, and for shipping it overseas. And they have to make sure that there is a proper structure in place on the other side for distribution. We're very concerned that it does not get sold. We're even more concerned that it gets lost somewhere on the way. So we do need to make sure it gets there by an organization who's been around for a while, who has proven they can handle something like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Adrian. That was very enlightening. It's appreciated, and I'm sure that my colleagues on committee appreciate the answering of many things that the Gleaners have left in our mind open. So now we know all about you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I was asking the clerk, and we don't usually do that, Mr. Chair. I know. So we move on to item P7217. That would be Kelly Martell from MHBC Consulting This is the town's consultants who have worked diligently with our staff with regarding the Northwest Quadrant Secondary Plan. And I believe you have a presentation, and I believe at some point, Mr. Treble, you'll make some comments with regard to the process and how we got to where we are today.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to present to council tonight. The purpose of this presentation is to provide council with a final recommendation and land use schedule and implementing policies for the secondary plan for the Northwest Quadrant. So throughout this presentation, I will provide a brief overview of the background to the project, review the public consultation that's occurred to date, and provide a description of the evolution of the plan from conceptual to the final recommended land use schedule and policies before you tonight for consideration and approval. So following the settlement of the land swap exchange process, which brought these lands into the urban area boundary, MHBC was retained to create a secondary plan to guide the future development of the Northwest Quadrant, including the appropriate location, density, and neighborhood layout, which will ultimately result in the development of the Northwest Quadrant as a complete community. So, as I said, the lands were brought in to accommodate future residential development. They're located in northwest Smithville and are generally situated between existing residential lands to the east, south, and southwest, and agricultural lands to the north and the northwest. And the CP Railway intersects these parcels. It's the intent that these lands be developed primarily as a residential community with local serving commercial uses, and it's to serve as a gateway to Smithville. So by way of background, the project began in November 2015, and then we moved on to hold a neighborhood meeting where we presented preliminary conceptual neighborhood design options for community and stakeholder feedback. Then these options were further refined and consultation continued. And we're now in phase 5 of the project, which is the final phase, where we have provided a final land use schedule and implementing secondary plan policies for approval to be incorporated into the township's official plan through Official Plan Amendment 45. So I'll just briefly go over the public consultation timeline. As I said, the first public information center was in March 2016. At that time, we presented 3 preliminary conceptual land use plans, and they provided high-level identification of potential transportation connections, location of stormwater management facilities, residential mix, and the location of parks. And then the concept was refined based on feedback from staff, residents, stakeholders, and agencies. And then we developed a preliminary preferred land use schedule, which included a refined street pattern and locations of various land use designations, which was provided for further feedback and consultation in June and July of 2016. Implementing policies were also provided at this time. And an additional public meeting was held in March of 2017, which provided a revised land use schedule and policies based on further comments received. So final refinements have been made since the March 2017 meeting to address these comments, and this has resulted in the version which is being brought forward today for approval. So I'll briefly kind of just go over this. The first 3 slides are the 3 concepts we provided in March 2016. They're high level. They identify possible connections and no street pattern, but they show potential areas for roads, stormwater management, and parkland. So those are those 3. And then in June and July, we came forward with a refined road network and land use designations prepared based on a set of guiding principles for the area. And then in March 2017, this was the concept provided, And it involved further revisions to the road network based on council direction to explore the inclusion of an additional rail crossing, removal of the natural feature based on MPCA confirming that it was not significant, revisions to the collector road network, and the location of the commercial designation, and recognition of existing uses and zoning permissions. So that would be the special policy area B there. And following the March 2017 public meeting, additional feedback was provided and the plan revised to address these concerns, which included concerns with the existing property ownership patterns and fragmented lots. So not all, and then also not all property owners were ready to develop the land. We received comment and concern from the members of the Greek community for recognition of their existing use. And we also received a request for confirmation of higher density along Highway 20 and a request for reconsideration of the policies related to highway commercial use provisions, which at that time included the prohibition of drive-through facilities in the commercial designation. Further concerns were identified with regard to connections to Highway 20. This was from the region, landowners, and the Greek community who expressed concern with the Streamside Drive connection going through their property. So then there was the desire for the secondary plan to consider maintaining crossings at Grimsby Road 5 and Grimsby Road 6. Based on what is known from CP, the crossing would be grade separated, and this has been maintained in the policy of the plan brought forward tonight. But while the policy framework considers it could occur, it is being shown as open on the recommended land use schedule. And this modification addresses landowner concerns related to timing and waiting to develop before they can waiting for the crossing to develop before they can bring plans forward. And finally, we received comment regarding consideration for permitting medium density residential uses on the future development blocks, and consideration of alternative window laneway development versus window street or backlotting, it generally just to allow a bit more flexibility there for future development. And so finally, taking all those comments in, and we came up with the changes. So here's the final plan being recommended tonight, and I'm going to go through the key changes with you bit by bit. So the first one, again, like I said, recognize the existing institutional use. The existing Greek community is identified now in the plan and designated to permit the existing use, allowing them to continue use of this parcel as it is today. We've included policy in the secondary plan, which would allow the land subject to an amendment to the official plan, which they could then be integrated into the community. Second, we've refined the internal road and collector road network, and we've updated implementing policies. So we've allowed for a new crossing at Grimsby Road 6 in the future. It now considers that the existing crossing may stay open or close. We've allowed for future road extensions and connections with the existing road pattern of the adjacent subdivisions. We've relocated the park and made refinements to the park and trail network to provide active transportation links to the multi-use recreational site. So there's a policy in the plan which would allow the township to contemplate cash in lieu. However, the intent is to provide connections to the MERS. Linear strips provide mid-block linkages, which also serve as connectors from the outlet to the swim pond. And we made policy modifications which allow for flexible development. So these are more kind of identified in the policy. That's why there's a lot of stars on this one. But essentially what we've done is low-density residential dwelling types are permitted in the medium-density residential designation. subject to ensuring the overall density targets are met. Likewise, medium-density residential dwelling types are permitted in the low-density residential designation. And I just want to note that previous concepts showed that there was more low-density residential on the southern parcel, so the one south of the rail tracks. And we know that it's changed now to medium density, but the policies and the plans still allow flexibility for singles, and we anticipate that there will probably be singles occurring here. Generally, the overall intent is that a ground-oriented residential neighborhood will develop, and the policies are flexible to allow that. And then more policy modifications for the township to consider alternative design options within the future development designation. So this considers that the region is undergoing an MCR right now, and there may be a future urban boundary expansion here. We don't know. But if that's the case, Spring Creek Road might benefit from different design options, and that would be subject to the township's consideration. And then again, both low and medium density residential development is permitted in the land's designated future development. And the final policy modification would be that drive-throughs are now permitted in the commercial designation. So that is the key changes to the plan and the policies being brought forward tonight for your approval. So staff are recommending approval of the secondary plan via official plan amendment 45. And implementation would be through a zoning bylaw amendment and future development applications to follow in the coming months. And with that, my presentation is complete, and I thank you for allowing me to be here and give you that overview tonight.
Well, thank you very much. And we are going to be having a fairly intense discussion, I'm sure, in a little while. As the item comes forward as an item on our agenda, your presentation is appreciated and received. Mr. Treble, I think it would be more appropriate that as a preamble to discussing the item on the agenda, that you might give a preamble of how we've, of the other facts with regard to how we got here and the next steps of what it is committee can.
At your pleasure, Madam Chair.
I just think that as we have a number of other presenters for appointments, so it might be, we do have at least two more. I've been advised, so if they choose to take one, I'm fine, but if there's two, and then members of the public, so if we move along to the item, I think that might be more appropriate for council comments. Is that okay with you guys? Okay, so we have Mr. Arians and Angela Bonamici from the IBI group with regard to their comments on the Northwest Quadrant Secondary Plan. Am I right in that you both wanted to address committee, sorry. By the way, just so that you all know, this is a very heavy agenda, and I apologize to anybody for what we're going through. We have a number of speakers. We also have a big agenda. There's a zoning bylaw review as well as the secondary plan that we're going through. So this is it's difficult, and if there are any members of the public who have dealt with their issue and it doesn't appear as a report on the agenda, you're welcome to stay throughout the rest of our meeting. But if there's no item on the balance of our agenda for you to be concerned about, please don't feel that you have to be here on this lovely summer evening.
Good evening, Chair, Mayor, councilors, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this matter. I'm Angela Bonamici with IBI Group, and although John Arians is also listed, we are going to be discussing two separate parcels within the Northwest Quadrant. I am here on behalf of Dunlow Developments. They own the 14 acres located to the north of CP Rail. So here's the secondary plan concept that staff have presented and are requesting approval for. They envision a single municipal road which will meet up with Street A on the adjacent lands to the east across South Grimsby Road 5. Low density is proposed fronting on the proposed road as well as Spring Creek Road with medium density along the tracks and the westerly portion of Spring Creek Road. This is the concept that we came up with for the client. Both of our plans show medium density along the tracks and a portion of Spring Creek Road. We both propose only one municipal road. We are looking to provide our own stormwater management facilities so that we can proceed independently and not have to wait for the southern lands to be developed. Low density would still be located on the south side of the proposed road. Our client's plan would allow for medium density all along Spring Creek Road. Staff have expressed concerns about the street not lining up with Street A on the adjacent parcel on the other side of South Grimsby Road 5. If the alignment is necessary, our design, the street can line up with Street C of that adjacent lands. The town also expressed concerns regarding singles fronting on South Grimsby Road 5. However, the adjacent parcel across South Grimsby Road 5 is allowing for singles to front on that road. While a majority of the land is proposed to be medium density, this designation does allow for more flexibility. You can have singles, semis, and towns. So while we did a concept, we also tried to implement our secondary plan to show what we can fit into the lot. This plan will hit the 50 units per hectare with approximately 132 units in total, and it would allow for a good mix of singles, semis, and townhouses. A previous concern of ours was the timing of development for the lands that were labeled future development. Through discussions with the staff, it is our understanding that once Spring Creek Road is urbanized up to South Grimsby Road 5, then the lands labeled future development can go ahead with being developed, and we're satisfied with that. The main difference of our plan to the staff's plan is the alignment of Street A. The location of Street A on staff's plan doesn't allow for a window street along Spring Creek Road. There's just not enough depth for it, and so that's why we're proposing a slightly skewed street. As well, we previously mentioned that we would like to seek a provision in the secondary plan regarding future cost sharing for the urbanization of Spring Creek Road, if and when the lands to the north of Spring Creek Road come into the urban area. We also have a concern of safety for Spring Creek Road. It is very long and straight, which will allow for the potential of speeding. So previously we requested possibly 2 roundabouts to slow down as traffic calming measures for that road. So here's the recommended plan against our Dunlow plan. And as you can see, they are fairly similar. What we suggest is between now and the June 26th meeting, we could work with staff to further fine-tune our concepts so they're on par with each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici, and certainly something that we'll be discussing a little later in the meeting. So, Mr. Arians, I believe you're probably going to speak to us about the lands south of the tracks.
That's why you're the chair, right?
No, don't say that.
So I am here on behalf of the lands to the south. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Putting together a secondary plan, I always picture the cover on the jigsaw puzzle, and that's what we're trying to achieve. And then there are different properties and different lotting fabrics underneath that, but the intent is for all the parcels to fit together in a very cohesive pattern. This is the concept plan for the southerly portion of the lands, and instead of putting stars on the properties, I've identified 6 areas of concern that my client has. and I'd like to review these one by one. The first area of concern are the two entrances on the South Grimsby Road 5. We feel that one entrance is really all that's required, and particularly given what I anticipate will be the difficulty of acquiring those access points, because those are existing lots that people own. People think they have the right to, build a house on those lots in the future, and that there really isn't development potential. It's not like a developer building a road and then they get lots that front on that road. The folks that own these particular lots really don't benefit from any road connections. So I can see a great deal of difficulty in acquiring the 2 points of entrance onto South Grimsby Road 5, and for that reason we recommend only the one road. The second point is the efficiency of Street G. And Street G, if I can get the mouse to work, here we go, is this street in this location here. And you can see it abuts the Greek community and it abuts the stormwater management pond. None of that has development potential. We've had meetings with our colleagues at the Greek Community Association, and they have no interest in developing that property with this road. So here we are asking Mars to build a road which will only have one side development. And in addition, it's only one side here, and it's one side along that stormwater management pond. So it's not a very efficient road. And in fact, the two streets that run parallel to each other, in my opinion, result in inefficiencies and result in difficulty in achieving this lotting pattern that's shown on the concept plan. In particular, area number 3 results in the need for having backlotting against the CP rail. And through previous meetings, I think committee is aware of our client's intent to come up with a very unique, innovative design with window streets fronting CP rail and having that as the interface. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. The fourth concern dealt with the park location. And originally, it was our thoughts that this is the area where the high density is proposed, right by the roundabout. This is really where the need is for larger amounts of municipal park, yet the park is located up in this far corner. Having talked to staff recently, we understand that the park is basically meant to be a small gathering place, a focal point, and there's one over at South Grimsby Road 6 in this location, one over here, and then there's this connecting link that ties the two together, and ultimately that'll connect onto the community center and the fairgrounds park, which is only a few hundred meters further to the east. So we do have some concerns over the size and the location of that particular park block. In addition, the location of the stormwater management facility has caused concerns, and our engineers have looked at it. We now have a detailed topographic survey of this particular property. We acknowledge that the actual low spot, the drainage, actually goes under Regional Road 20 in this location here, and I have to acquiesce to our engineering colleagues that this area here really is the best location for the stormwater management pond, even though it does front onto Regional Road 20. Our last area of concern I've mentioned is the interface with CP Rail and the fact that backlotting is required certainly in this location here, and then probably a different form of window street treatment could occur here, but there's this inconsistent treatment along this particular interface. So as a result, this is the concept plan that Mars Homes has come up with, and I should introduce Anthony Carella from Mars, who is in the audience today. And you'll see abutting CP Rail, we have these really unique little horseshoes of private roads, and then there are townhouses fronting that private road with the end units connected by a garage in between. So that garage is what protects all these rear yard amenity areas with the townhouses backing onto each other. So it's a very unique concept with the window street, with townhouses facing each other, and this connecting horseshoe providing noise attenuation and providing separation. What the Mars concept includes are 56 singles, 84 of what I'm referring to as these horseshoe townhouses, and approximately 90 block townhouses for a total of about 230 units. As Angela commented on, the Dunlow plan meets the provincial guidelines of 50 persons or jobs per hectare. so does the Mars plan. In fact, it exceeds it. So this is the concept plan that was developed for Mars. We're ready to submit a draft plan of subdivision, but for compliance with the secondary plan. Now, to illustrate how these horseshoe towns work, this is an aerial photograph of a development that Mars just completed in Grimsby. Instead of the railway being along the south, this is the Queen Elizabeth Way corridor. And you can see this is those horseshoe roads. These are the townhouses. This is the garage attachment, and here's more townhouses. So we've got townhouses, the garage, and more townhouses. And it's the garages that create the noise barrier that protects these interior amenities. And from the street, they're very desirable looking units. These are the garages. These are the townhouse units. The garage provides the protection for that rear yard. So it's a very flexible, it's a very innovative design. And as a result of the Mars concept, this is the secondary plan that we are recommending to you tonight. So to deal with the issues that I mentioned, first and foremost, there's only one road connection shown on South Grimsby Road 5 in this location here, and that corresponds directly across the road with the Northridge Drive in that location. So only one road connection is being proposed. Secondly, we've removed that redundant second inefficient road pattern that was here and created one east-west street shown in this location as a more efficient form of development. And the Greek community is basically left as it sits today with a slight adjustment to the rear property line, and Mars has an offer to purchase with the Greek community, and they are here themselves to say that we are currently negotiating that land acquisition. If that acquisition does not acquire, then these units up here can simply be reduced, and a minor adjustment to Street F can readily accommodate and leave the Greek lands totally as they sit today. So the plan is flexible, and it accommodates both our wishes and the wishes of the Greek community. If the road were to run parallel to that property line, we would be seeking cost sharing. We would be seeking servicing requests from the Greeks. But they have no interest in developing their land from that direction, and that road frontage is totally not of any use to them. So this plan removes what we consider to be that inefficient second road. The parks remain in the two corners. This park has been slightly enlarged. This park has been slightly reduced. That linear connection remains across the railroad lands. The CP interface, in my opinion, is treated a little bit better with more flexibility. The window street concept remains. Backlotting is avoided against the CP tracks, and a more flexible road pattern is available to accommodate those townhouses. And lastly, the stormwater management pond has been sized in accordance with the engineering requirements, and it has been placed at the low spot. And as I said, we've had to take the advice of the engineers on this rather than putting it in the internal areas. This is, in fact, the low spot and the most desirable location for the stormwater management facility. So when we compare the two, I can say that we're not that far apart, really. The land uses are generally the same. The park locations are generally the same. The stormwater management is generally the same. And the road pattern is generally the same. However, our plan is based on a more detailed concept. As I said, we've got a topographic survey. We're preparing a draft plan of subdivision for submission. I think, township staff and the consultants have been looking at it at a higher level, whereas we've been down at the detailed design stage, and as a result, there's been some refinement on our part. And I would echo Ms. Bonamici's comments that we're not that far apart. We're hoping that between now and the council meeting, we'll be able to meet with staff to resolve the remaining outstanding issues so that you will have a plan before you at the next council meeting that really is a made-in-Smithville solution to this secondary plan. So those are my comments, and I'd welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Arians.
You're welcome.
And we will be discussing this shortly. And at that time, we may be looking to comments from both you and Ms. Bonamici. But at this time, we're listening to the public input with
All
regard
right.
to these lands. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I believe that concludes everyone that made appointment to speak at this evening's meeting, but there is now in Section 5 of our agenda the opportunity to address items on the agenda, and that's for anybody being here in the audience. Those who wish to discuss or address an item on the agenda are permitted to speak for no more than 10 minutes. Is there anyone in the audience present wishing to address items on the agenda? I saw your hand first, and then immediately behind you is a gentleman. No, please. If you wouldn't mind coming forward, and regardless of how many of us may already know you, if you could state your name and the property you're representing.
Madam Chair, Mr. Mayor, members of council, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Maria Apostolakos. I'm the secretary of the Greek Association Ayos Haralabos of Niagara. We also have a few other members of our board here tonight. I just wanted to introduce them so everybody is aware who's who. Our president, Bill Macris. Nalia Macris is our treasurer. Tina Seaton, Angela Koutsouyanopoulos, Stephanos Keratopoulos, and Sandra Sherman. Thank you very much for the opportunity to allow us to speak. Unfortunately, our planner wasn't able to attend tonight, but he did send me, he emailed me a couple of letters that he wanted me to read that addresses our concerns. And I believe, does everybody have a copy? I submitted the letters.
Do we have them? No. The clerk is going to distribute those, so please go forward.
Thank you. The first letter deals with the Northwest Smithville Secondary Plan. At the previous public meetings for the Northwest Smithville Secondary Plan, the township's consultants and township planning staff presented plans to designate the lands owned by the Greek Association Ayos Haralabos of Niagara at 6659 Highway 20, Smithville, as follows. Part institutional, part medium-density residential, part low-density residential, part medium-high density residential under Special Policy A, part stormwater management, and including 2 public roads traveling or traversing the site. These proposed designations had no regard for the location of our existing institutional building and use for our needs, and would require many parts of our property to be sold to abutting lands to implement the design. Subsequently, as new and revised plans were investigated by the township's consultants, we became concerned about the implications of this long-term future planning on our property, particularly as the new road layout will severely impact the use of the site. We have recently had discussions with Mars Homes, who own land abutting our site, as the proposed secondary plans severely affect both properties. We support the alternate plans proposed by IBI Group on behalf of Mars Homes, as their plans would more appropriately accommodate the interests of the area property owners, reduce the needs for numerous land assemblies, and promote a cooperative and compatible neighborhood design. The second letter deals with the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. At the previous public meetings for draft new zoning B-law, it was proposed to zone all of our lands as institutional. And Part 9 of the bylaw included all of the proposed zoning provisions related to institutional uses. As a result, we were confident that our cultural center could continue without complications, and thus we did not speak at the previous public meeting. This originally proposed institutional zoning is now being changed to a developmental zone, which has the effect of freezing the use of our lands. Since this new development zone on our site was not presented at the previous public meetings, we believe that it is appropriate for the township to hold a further public meeting to present all of the proposed zoning change details now proposed, so that the public can have sufficient time to assess and respond to the new zoning change. Or alternatively, from our perspective, we request the institutional zone be returned to our land previously proposed.
That's it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Can we do that one more time? Apostalakos. Oh, I did that wrong. Sorry. And they say Chichok's hard to say. I believe the gentleman behind you is wishing to speak.
Good evening, council, planners, and future developers. We are coming back today, Mike and Denise Ellis.
Could you just give us your
45
name? Sorry.
That's Mike Ellis, and my wife Denise Ellis, 45 North Ridge Drive, Smithville. As I was saying, we're coming back again today over our concerns for safety for everybody, and including us on the south side of the track. In hopes that everyone is on board with doing the right thing. Going back, when we purchased our house in the mid-'80s, the rail behind us was owned by the TH&B. One train, maybe two trains a day. And in fact, it was assumed that the rail was going to be closed. But everyone found out that there was no issue for abandonment, and then CP took over the rail. Of course, you know that the rail was completely taken over by CP and is now a major shipping line that carries all kinds of materials, freight, including dangerous liquids in tankers. These trains go by multiple times per day and often at very high speeds, especially through the night when no one is watching. This is just a reminder that of previous mistakes were made by council and planning departments. Our setbacks to the rail line is set at 70 feet, well off the setback standards of CP. Also, the elevation of the rail is approximately 5 to 6 feet higher than our backyards. This is very, very intimidating when these trains go by at the best of times. At present, the noise and vibrations and smoke levels are very intense, as well as a very high risk of severe injury or death, Lord forbid, a derailment should ever happen. Has any environment monitoring and any assessments or recommendations been made? Is CP fully aware and properly informed on the whole situation or plan? Can council guarantee that no berm is to be built on the other side of our tracks, behind our house, north side of the rail line, without any kind of plan to reduce environment, pollution, safety on our side, the south side of the rail? We believe even with the berm we believe even with no berm and a wall of medium density housing townhomes will also affect us. It does the same thing. In closing, we are asking council to be responsible and not to build on and increasingly intensify on previous mistakes. All we want is to have it just as safe and have the same quality of life on both sides of the tracks. And I also like to mention from the previous time we were here, we're in the minutes, that our name and address is wrong in the minutes. I think you have that corrected.
Thank you, Mr.
It should
Ellis.
sit on page 2, where it says current situation, number 1. It should be Denise and Mike Ellis, not Dan Ellis, at 45 North Ridge Drive.
We apologize, and thank you for that correction.
That's all I have. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. If you have speaking notes, any of the speakers this evening who have notes with regard to their presentations, if you wouldn't mind providing the clerk, Mrs. Shime, with a copy of it, either as you leave or at some point tomorrow, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public wishing to address committee at this point in time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda items. Pardon me. There are 5 items of consent. These are more routine and non-controversial items that can be approved by one resolution. There will be no separate discussion of the items unless a member of committee requests it. So with regard to items 1 to 5 in our consent agenda, that would be Heritage Committee meetings for November 17th, and Heritage Committee meetings minutes for December 15th, and the Multi-Municipal Wind Turbine Working Group minutes of April 13th, and the information report PDO 7517 regarding 911 Public Emergencies Reporting Service, and information report PDO 8317 reform of the Ontario Municipal Board. Planning, Building, Environmental Committee hereby approve the following consent agenda items 1 to 5 being hereby received for information, with any exceptions being noted. I'm looking for a mover. Councillor Rayner, Councillor Ganan. Anyone, any polls? I believe that the information regarding the Ontario Municipal Board reform are going to be touched on by Mr. Treble in the further discussions regarding the secondary plan. So, having said that, and having a duly moved and seconded, all in favor? That motion carries. Okay, with regard to communication, there is an item from the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. The item is the NPCA Board Report number 50-17 and Appendix 1, the draft Living Landscape Policies, Procedures, and Guidelines for Administration and of Ontario Regulation 15506. And the recommendation there is that the correspondence from the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, most specifically NPCA Board Report number 50-17 and Appendix number 1, that would be the draft Living Landscape Policies, Procedures, Guidelines for Administration of Ontario Regulation 155-/06, be received and referred to the Director of Planning and Building to provide comments prior to the deadline of June 30th, 2017. I believe, Mr. Treble, you wish to speak to that regarding an extension that you've received or notice from the NPCA.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. Yes, the Conservation Authority held a public, I think about 3 or 4 public information centers in May. I was at the one in Wellandport. Garrett was also there that evening. And I had a chance to speak to Mr. Peter Graham, who was, or who is the head of the policy piece leading this review, and indicated to him the challenge that we would have in terms of achieving comments by then, since any comments would need to come before this committee before we shared them in a public forum. And the message that I was given was that that would be no problem, because the region has also indicated that they will have difficulties providing comments. In fact, the region is indicating they need until September sometime in order to provide comments. So it's my understanding, based on the discussions that evening, that other municipalities, including ourselves, will also have additional time. So it would be my thought that I will have a report before this committee in September at the latest, earlier if I can do that, and that report will look at the policies and some of the implications on the township. And the one point I know that we do need to deliberate on, I won't belabor it tonight, but there's different concepts on the way floodplain mapping should occur, whether you use a 1-zone or a 2-zone approach. They're looking for some input from the township on that piece, and it certainly will have implications for Wellandport area especially. So it's important that we do a review and do it right.
So this isn't moved or seconded, and the deadline date of June 30th. Should we change that or ask that that be changed to September 30th based on our latest information? No later, your information will come forward and our discussion will happen no later than September 30th? I guess that leaves us. Is that appropriate at this point in time? We're not going to make the June 30th deadline, so what I'm asking is, should this motion say that we're going to do it prior to that when you're not going to meet it? Or should we be altering this recommendation such that it would say that we ask the NPCA for a formal extension to, obviously, September, when we'll have time for public input and whatever else needs to be done? It just seems silly to pass this motion when it's not going to happen. So, why don't we would it be appropriate for a committee, unless I'm seeing the acting CAO come in with something different than that, would it be more appropriate for us to provide comments and that we look for an extension until, we look to the NPCA for an extension to September, no later than September 2017?
Madam Chair, I have given Peter Graham an email outlining what I just told you and the suggestion of September, hoping that he would reply saying he has no concerns. But as of right now, I don't have that reply. So if committee wants to do something more formal, that certainly supports my ask.
I just find it kind of, and I'll go to you in a moment, Councillor Bilsma, but I just find it kind of redundant in that you've told us we'll not make June 30th and that we give you direction to provide that, when in fact what we're really doing is seeking an extension so that we might get the appropriate comments like other municipalities. So I'm open to committee, but Councillor Bilsma, I'll turn to you. Maybe I guess I should get the motion on the table. Okay. I was trying to get staff to give us an alternate motion before we went there, but can I have a mover and seconder for this one and then a discussion? Councillor Bilsma, so moved. A seconder, Councillor Ganan. Okay, so I'm open to suggestions. Madam Clerk, CAO, whatever you are tonight, yes, both.
Through you to members of the committee, perhaps an amendment to remove the last part of that recommendation, just stop it at deadline, and when the deadline is adjusted, then he would just update members of council. So remove date of June 30th, 2017 from the motion.
There you go. Do we need to amend that now that it's on the table? So I need someone to move an amendment to that. Councillor Bilsma. And great. And Councillor Ganan? Great. We can make that a friendly amendment? It doesn't change the context, does it? You're right, but it's the same mover and seconder, but we can do that. So on the comments on this motion, seeing none, then on the amendment, all in favor? That motion carries. And on the original motion, as amended, that motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay. I apologize for taking us down that road. Now, as to staff reports, item P76-17, with regard to technical report and zoning bylaw amendment for B&A Heaslip Farms, Pam Heaslip, agent. The recommendation is that report PD 07217 regarding B&A Heaslip, file number 1601-00717 dated June 12th be received, and that the recommendation report be presented at a future Planning, Building, Environmental Committee meeting. Mover for that, Councillor Ganan, Councillor Trombetta. Comments? Councillor Rayner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Bosma. Was this 42 acres? Borsman, sorry.
It's okay. I think it was about 42, 43. Oh, it's 42.3, I'm hearing.
Yes.
And through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Borsma. You mentioned something earlier about 100 acres. Can you go over that part again? It's kind of thrown me a curve because this isn't 100 acres.
Through you, Madam Chair, the minimum lot size requirement in the zoning bylaw is 100 acres under the draft zoning bylaw. That if it gets approved, this zoning bylaw amendment would be under. So currently, under our current zoning bylaw, it's only 40 acres. But if tonight the draft zoning bylaw were to be approved, then this zoning bylaw amendment next month would be under the new zoning bylaw, which is 100 acres. So that's why we have to recognize that this lot is deficient of that 100 acres required.
So it's 40 right now?
Right now, our zoning bylaw allows for these types of severances with 40 acres.
That's what I thought.
Yes, but this particular item is going to be coming back because it's a technical report. So when it comes back, if we were to approve the new zoning bylaw that's on tonight's agenda, the land required will be 100 acres in order to achieve this change. So this particular item, and I'm going to Mr. Treble in a second, would be deficient in the amount of land required to create the zoning, the revision. Mr. Treble?
Just, if I may, Madam Chair, some additional input that might help. The province has taken a fairly strong position that they feel that a 100-acre lot or a 40-hectare lot is a more appropriate lot size when you look at the province as a whole in terms of, they use the word flexibility of the lands for agricultural uses in the future and currently. I'll use the word viable. It's kind of a similar approach. So the suggestion is that if we were creating lots in the agricultural area, we should be creating lots closer to the 100 acres. This is a situation, however, where you already have a lot that's only probably 44 acres in size, and you're making it 42 acres by removing the surplus severance. So it already is deficient from the lot size requirements that the province is suggesting we use. It doesn't take away from the ability of the farmer to apply for the severance because the change in size is so small that it's still acceptable because of its original character in the agricultural area. So from a policy perspective, we should be using 100 when we create lots, but the surplus policies aren't bound to that same 100 lot minimum standard. We are obligated to recognize it in the zoning bylaw, but we're not bound by achieving that every time we do a surplus severance.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. Councillor Rayner, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Treble. But as of next week, if this gets approved, we would turn this down?
No, Madam Chair, through you, this lot size provision applies more to the creation of new lots, not to the severance of a surplus farmhouse off a farm. At that point, you look at it from the point of view of what is the lot size now, and then what the lot size would be after the severance, and determine if you've taken away the agricultural potential of that existing lot. So in this case, it's, let's say, 44 acres now, it's going to 42. You're not really impacting the ability of that farm to be farmed because it's already deficient from the province's perspective. We have to use a lot size of 40 hectares or 100 acres for new lots. That's where the province really kicks in with their provision.
So maybe if you can make that clear, I think what Councillor Rayner is saying is if someone came forward with a new application and had 80 acres next month.
Through you, Madam Chair, for surplus purposes, it wouldn't make any difference to the type of application. It would, though, in the event that a farmer came in with, let's say, 300 acres. In the instance of a 300-acre farm, you could maybe split it into 3 100-acre parcels, but we're not going to split it into 7 40-acre parcels, as an example. That will not be supported.
Councillor Rayner, no, I don't want to take away from you, still having the floor, so.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So none of this is affecting a surplus farm dwelling application. That's correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I understand the need to 100 because the 100 is what's considered to be a viable farm operation, although you could put greenhouses on less than 10 acres and make it a very viable farm operation. You could also put chickens on it, make it a very viable farm operation. I don't quite understand. The other thing is, I'm sure Mr. Treble will agree, I don't think there's a lot of 300 or 400 acre farms in Niagara because of the nature of the geographic area. Large acreages of property are kind of rare now. To find a farms that have 300 acres in Niagara is I would think, quite rare compared to other counties, other municipalities.
Through the use of checkerboarding, have farmers been astute and perhaps own large acreages, but 100 acres at a time?
Through you, Madam Chair, this region certainly has a lot of fragmentation across the region. There's no question about that. I can't speak for the whole of the region, but certainly in West Lincoln, Councillor Rayner is correct that finding large farm parcels is a challenge. Ironically, though, sometime within the last year, we processed an application for a severance of over a 300-acre farm parcel into into 3 lots, which were in the range of 100 acres each. Not any one of them was exactly that, but the concept generally achieved those expectations. So they are out there. They are difficult to find. But the 100 acres is something that's really been directed or mandated by the province as a criteria going forward. It does not take away from the surplus opportunities.
Just one more question, if you don't mind, Madam Chair, through Mr. Treble. But it does matter the type of farming operation that's on the land, because you don't need 100 acres to make a viable farm, which federally means you have to gross 7,000 or more. You can do it on much smaller acreages depending on what type of agriculture you're going into, which is what I've previously mentioned. Is that not correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would agree fully that certain types of farming, be it chicken farming or greenhouse farming, do not require the same larger sizes. We do have a policy set inside our official plan that recognizes that, so that if somebody came forward with a proposal and said that 100 acres was not appropriate in their instance, we have a policy to guide how we could deal with that and reduce the zoning level down from the 100 acres to a smaller number that was appropriate.
Thank you. So the flexibility is there.
So the flexibility is still
That's
there
all I
as
asked.
long as it's for agricultural purposes.
That's
Okay.
important. Thank you very
So
much.
that was the point, and it came out with the presentation. This particular topic, probably, I've given some latitude, but it's probably more appropriate our zoning discussions a little bit later on. Are there other members of committee with questions? Did I see another hand? No? Okay, that's fine. Seeing no others, I have a duly moved and seconded motion. All in favor? That motion carries. Okay, with regard to the technical report regarding zoning bylaw amendment for Leonard and Lynn Snippa, as well as Mitch and Elise Snippa, the report PDO 7317 regarding Leonard and Lynn Snippa, Mitch and Elise Snippa, file number 1601-00817, dated June 12, 2017, be received, and that a recommendation report be presented at a future Planning, Building, Environmental Committee meeting. I see hands. So I did see Councillor Rayner's first, and then Mayor Joyner. Oh, is that what you're doing?
That's what it is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Moved by Councillor Rayner, seconded by Mayor Joyner. Comments? All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. I'm sorry. I was just into comment craze. Item P7817, this is regard to the proposed street name for Stepping Stones condominium. The recommendations are that report PDO 7817 regarding proposed street name for Stepping Stones condominium applicant Catalina Construction and Landscape Corporation, file number 2000-08316, dated June 12, 2017, be received, and that a recommendation report be presented at a future Planning, Building, Environmental meeting once all agency and public comments have been received and once a name has been chosen. I need a mover. Councillor Trombetta, Mayor Joyner. Comments? Mayor Joyner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd be willing to let Mr. Treble go forward. Thanks. First.
Oh, I see. Mr. Treble.
Madam Chair, I took the opportunity to sneak out and grab the historical atlas for Lincoln County from 1876. We all remember it well. The owner of the farm at that particular point in time was initials T.A. and then surname Allen, A-L-L-E-N.
Oh, really? Thank you very much, Mr. Treble, for that research. Mayor Joyner, you can have the floor next.
Thank you. And through you to Mr. Treble, is the name Allen on the historical list, Mr. Treble?
Sure. I don't, through you, Madam Chair, I don't see it on either list. Well, that's what Garrett and I were just chatting about. I know we kind of call South Grimsby 5 Allen Road, so that may be why.
That could be. Thank you for that. Mayor Joyner.
Sorry for all of this. I was just trying to go back in some of the historical data. Quite honestly, it's very neat to understand who owned the land back in 1876, although that is not exactly what I was looking for. A lot of the names based on the historical list that we have right now, as I understand it, are veterans that owned land back in World War I, during World War I and World War II. So the time between 1900 and 1950, if I can use that. And I know that that's not when either one of those wars started, but if we could just use that timeline there. Back in that time, I understand that there was a gentleman by the name of Alec Young that owned that property. I've been trying to vigorously find out if he was a veteran. I don't believe that he was. So, for reference, a lady that you may know at this time, that happened to be Sandra McIntyre, Jack McIntyre's,
Yes, wife.
Sandra's maiden name, and that was her father who owned that property. So, but I don't believe he was a veteran, and I didn't see the name Young on
Are you saying Young or Young?
Young,
Because
yeah.
Young Street is up, we already used that one, right?
Right, but yes, we do. You're right. So
Sorry.
that's just
Yeah, no,
sort of
this,
some
these
back
are,
reference,
this is
that's
some
all.
great stuff that we
Yeah.
should be thinking about as we move forward and respecting those that were and those that will come yet. Mr. Treble, you're getting some indication of the fact that we'd like to have a variety of opportunities
Yes.
to choose a name.
My thought, Madam Chair, is that staff would be more than happy to get a title search done to find out the historical succession of ownership surnames for these lands. That will not take much time to achieve. That certainly would add another dimension to this whole discussion, and it's information that I do not have tonight since we have not historically done that. But on a going forward basis, I can certainly see that the merits in that.
So you're suggesting that you would do that, it would come to this committee, and we might we would allow the Councillor Billsman and the committee to take a look at any information that we have, give their comments, and then all of that could come back to committee, and we'd have a comprehensive list of all and every name that we might want to use at some point, and specific to certain areas if we wanted to attribute them. Would that be something that you would undertake with staff, or?
Through you, Madam Chair, the challenges, I guess, are a couple. One, I know that Stepping Stones is anxious to proceed with development, so
Sure.
A name for this street needs to occur before we're issuing building permits so that we have proper legal identification. Secondly, it's kind of at the mercy of the Heritage Committee. I'm not sure when their next scheduled meeting is, but I know we've got at least two representatives here that can probably answer that question. So if the Heritage Committee is available between now and the July meeting of Committee Council, we could probably have something back to you by that night, for sure.
And certainly, we're open to any name that committee wishes to take off the list and/or anyone else wishes to put forward, as well as the two that have been brought forward, right? So we've got options, and I think we're looking for direction. Mayor Joyner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the essence of timeliness and that Phelps is looking for a name, I think that this is something that we can do in the future. I think right now we've got two names presented, and I am quite happy with council picking one of those two names at this time. But as you said, Madam Chair, and Mr. Treble, going forward, if that could be the process, I would be happy.
I think,
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, that the motion on the table is that a recommendation report be presented at a future meeting. So if we're suggesting that they bring forward a report with either A or B, we can choose that name in the future if this committee is saying, let's use one of the two proposed by the developer. Is that fair? And then we move forward with the other work that Mr. Treble might undertake for all named opportunities. Does that sound fair? Seeing no objection, then we'll look forward to a recommendation report at the next committee council meeting. Fair enough? All in favor of the motion on the floor? That motion carries. Okay. Oh, I see why. Sorry. I apologize. My charger wasn't connected. Okay, with regard to item P7917, which is a recommendation report about a zoning bylaw amendment for Wes and Jacqueline Blocker, Beeline Trenching, file number of 1601010. The recommendation on that report is that report PD 01917 regarding Wes and Jacqueline Blocker, Beeline Trenching, application for rezoning, file number 160101016, dated April 10th, 2017, be received, and that the application for zoning bylaw amendment 1601-01016 submitted by Wes and Jacqueline Blocker be amended and approved in accordance with the attached amending bylaw, and that no further public meeting is required for the consideration of this bylaw in accordance with Section 34, Sub 17 of the Planning Act, and that a bylaw as found at attachment number 1 to this report be approved, and that the mayor and clerk be and are hereby authorized to enter into a development agreement that will implement the zoning bylaw and replace the scale of the use. I need a mover. Councillor Bilsma, seconded by Councillor Gannan. Comments? All right. Sorry. It's on the agenda? Oh, yeah, it's right on the agenda. I knew I read it. Sorry. The proposed amendment to the recommendation, I might as well put that on the table right at the moment, is that that the recommendation contained in report PD 01917 regarding Wes and Jacqueline Blocker application for rezoning file 1601-01016 dated April 10th be amended as follows. That section 2 of the recommendation be deleted and replaced with the following: that application for zoning bylaw amendment 1601-01016 submitted by Wes and Jacqueline Blocker, Beeline Trenching, Inc., be amended and approved in accordance with the attached amending bylaw attached to the staff memorandum dated June 12th, and that section number 4 of the recommendation be deleted and replaced with the following: that the revised bylaw as attached to the staff's memorandum dated June 12th be approved. Now, I'm going to ask for that, a mover and a seconder to that amendment, and then I'm going to ask for Mr. Treble to just make sure that we all understand what that means. If it, there you go. I've preempted you, Councillor Rayner. I need a mover and seconder. Councillor Bilsma and Councillor Gannan are moving the amendment, which are further clarifications, and I believe this was due to the ongoing nature of the spirit of resolving the issue. So, Mr. Treble, if you could just speak to that item before I get council's comments.
Just through you, Madam Chair, really briefly, the staff had a recommendation report on the agenda at April planning. It was referred back to staff at council, I believe, in April, because of concerns that some of the neighbors had not had a fulsome input into the draft of the bylaw attached to the report in April. So subsequent to the referral back to staff, I took it upon myself to meet with the Blockers, the neighbors in question, as well as reach out to regional staff as well as Conservation Authority staff, and have made some tweaks, if I can call them that, to the amending bylaw, and the tweaks do show up in bold on page 389, where they have tried to fine-tune the language of the bylaw even further to make it a little more compatible with the neighborhood in terms of the use. So staff have not taken away from the intent or nature of the recommendation that was put forward in April, simply finessed, tweaked, whatever word you want to put on it, the language of the bylaw to make it more clear in terms of how to implement the business-related use and keep it accessory and small scale compared to the agricultural uses that must be front and center on this parcel. Does that help, Madam Chair? So the amendment is to approve the revised bylaw with the bold wording updates that are shown on page 389 of the agenda.
So basically, it changes the dimensions of how the site is zoned and provides for more buffering. The new revised wording provide for more buffering from the neighboring properties. Would that simplify it?
Yes, that's correct. That is one component of the changes for sure.
Okay, there are others, but that was the major one. Councillor Rayner, your hand is up. Did you had the floor?
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Mr. Treble. One of those changes, number 6, such issues as hours of operation, noise, dust, berms, and location of outside storage shall be addressed in the development agreement. Does that change the berms as they exist now? Because I believe the neighbor on the east, Jeff McDougall, complained about dust there. Is there a possibility that that berm can extend along that road there and the entrance and exit from that property be on Highway 20 or Regional Road 20, and therefore that would eliminate the traffic going in and out on that road, which is putting the dust across?
You might want to take a look at the photo that's up now, Councillor Rayner, that shows Highway 20 at the bottom of the screen.
So, Madam Chair, the shaded or hatched area is the area that's proposed to be rezoned. Staff, if this is the approval given to the owners of the land, staff will work with them to confine their use to that area, and whatever can be done to move the berms or realign the berms to make it such that the area or the use inside that area is restricted from the view and impact on the neighbors. That's what staff would intend to do. But until we have sort of the approved boundaries, it's difficult to make them go there just yet.
So a development agreement is the way that we can compel them to get a resolution.
The same thing with regards to calcium being put on it, so the dust could be reduced and that sort of situation which would occur. Because dust has been noted as the concern. Is that true, Mr. Treble?
Through you, Madam Chair, the wording of the development agreement will tackle all of those issues because they were ones that came up through the discussions. That's correct.
Okay.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to publicly thank Mr. Treble for allowing this opportunity to extend it from April and to further tweak this, because it was a concern for all parties, but all parties come together and resolve the issue, and that's what it's about. We just need a little extra time, and we needed Mr. Treble's expertise in order to resolve this. I think it does eliminate a lot of the issues that I believe the neighbors were complaining about, and I thank you, Mr. Treble, for that.
Thank you. Are there any other comments with regard to the, Mayor Joyner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just looking at number C here, and this is the entire parcel zoned A2, A2584. And down at the bottom there, it says failure to comply with this bylaw and the development agreement in its entirety shall result in the forfeit of the $5,000 security deposit. Is this our normal security deposit, Mr. Treble? Because it seems to be a little low to me. I could forgo a lot of these things for $5,000.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is new. We do not have such a security deposit that we collect for these types of applications. So this is an effort to try and put some teeth in the bylaw to encourage compliance and not have to be dealing with court situations in the future.
Madam Chair, so follow up if I could.
Please.
So, Mr. Treble, where did you come up with the $5,000? Why didn't you make it $55,000?
Through you, Madam Chair, the ability to collect monies is in the Planning Act, and we can really only collect security amounts that have some basis to them. I don't have much of a basis for a number unless we go through a detailed calculation of what potential impacts would be, and I'm not even sure how you would do that in terms of what the impacts on the neighbors might be. So the 5,000 is really just a number that I think is defensible, and something that, should we go forward, might be an incentive to encourage compliance.
Thank you for the answer, Mr. Treble.
Seeing no other comments, I'm going to ask for all in favor. That motion carries. Oh, sorry. On the amendment, all in favor. The amendment is carried. Now, on the original motion as amended, all in favor. That motion as amended carries.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Do you have the same mover and seconder for the amendment
I
as
do.
your original motion? Do you?
I do.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
I was very careful to get those guys. Okay, on item P 80-17, a recommendation report with regard to a zoning bylaw amendment for Kimberly Kazienko and James Smith. Stephen Rivers was their agent, file number 1601-01616. The recommendation is that report PD 081-17 regarding Kimberly Kazienko and James Smith, Stephen Rivers agent, application for rezoning, file number 1601-01616, dated June 12, 2017, be received, and that Section 34, Sub 17 of the Planning Act apply, and that no further public meeting is required, and that application for zoning bylaw amendment 1601-01616 submitted by Kimberly Kazienko and James Smith be approved. I need a mover. Councillor Trombetta and Councillor Bilsma. Comments? Seeing none, all in favor. That motion carries. Okay, a recommendation report in P81-17 regarding a zoning bylaw amendment for W&T Poultry, file number 1601-00517. That the recommendations contained, that recommendation report PDO 80-17 regarding W&T Poultry, Gabe Costas, agent, application for rezoning, file number 1601-00517, dated June 12th, 2017, be received, and that Section 3417 of the Planning Act and that no further public meeting is required, and that application for zoning bylaw amendment 1601-00517 submitted by W&T Poultry, Gabe Costas, agent, be approved. I need a mover. Mayor Joyner, Councillor Ganan. Comments? I see none. All in favor? That motion carries. With regard to item P82-17, which is a recommendation report regarding a zoning bylaw amendment for Teresa Crowder, an extension of a temporary use bylaw for a garden suite, file 1601-00617, that recommendation report PD-07917 regarding a zoning bylaw amendment for a temporary use bylaw for Teresa Crowder, garden suite application for a rezoning extension, file number 1601-00617, dated June 12th, be received, and that Section 34, sub 17 of the Planning Act apply, and that no further public meeting is required, and that application for zoning bylaw amendment 1601-00617 by Teresa Crowder be approved. I'm looking for a mover. Councillor Trombetta, Councillor Ganan. Comments? All in favor? That motion carries. With regard to item P83-17, a recommendation report for the adoption of the final secondary plan for the Northwest Quadrant, file number 1701-00414, official plan amendment number 45. There's a few pages on this report. That report, PDO 6517, regarding adoption of final secondary plan for the Northwest Quadrant, file number 1701-004, official plan amendment number 45, dated June 12, 2017, be received, and that the official plan amendment number 45 be and is hereby adopted by bylaw by Township Council, followed by the provision of notice and adoption in accordance with the Planning Act, and that the official plan amendment number 45, consisting of the following text and map schedules, and constitute an amendment to the Township of West Lincoln official plan as amended, and that implementation of the Northwest Quadrant secondary plan lands shall be by application for plan of subdivision, condominium, or site plan as appropriate. I need a mover. Mayor Joyner, Councillor Bell. There's comments? Oh, Mayor Joyner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to try and move this a little bit closer to my yap. Mr. Treble, through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Treble. So I see the recommendations that you have before us, and I understand we've had a couple of presentations by Ms. Bonamici and Mr. Arians and you know, people that are representing the Greek Hall on that. If we vote in favor of all the recommendations that you have there, does that mean that there still can't be dialogue between the representatives and the township going forward?
Through you, Madam Chair, the secondary plan is a high-level planning instrument that assists in helping guide how the land should unfold. But when you get into the intricacies of putting together a plan of subdivision or a plan of condominium, as both John Arians and Angela Bonamici have mentioned tonight, that's when you start finessing the plan and making minor adjustments to it. And so the policies of the plan that are recommended for approval tonight allow for adjustments as long as they are in keeping with the concept of how the development should unfold. And the secondary plan, as recommended by staff and our consultants, is attempting to take a lot of what you've heard tonight, it's not a lot that's any different than what we've been hearing over the time, and try and build a recommendation that's good for the community, looks sort of broader than the individual ownership interest, broader than the individual council interests even in this development, and looks at the community and what works best for the community. So I think the answer in a nutshell is that, yeah, there's ongoing dialogue that can happen the whole way through the process. We're simply attempting to set something down that can be the guiding tool for how we look at development applications. And if I can be so bold, Madam Chair, to look at the way certain pieces of the puzzle should fit together so that they're not afterthoughts or leftovers or whatever term you might want to give it. For example, parkland and linkages are important to the community. They may not be important to the developers, so they tend to want to give us the scraps or the remnant pieces that just don't fit into their puzzle. And I saw a bit of that in some of the planning that was presented tonight. In addition, as much as stormwater management ponds might not be desirable, they're a necessary evil, if I can call them that, and so they must be done right and be able to accommodate more than just the lands of the individual that is benefiting from it. Further in this plan, we're looking at a potential of a linkage from Highway 20 around the community to the north, and that linkage impacts a lot of different property owners as it goes. So, you know, there's a development charge component that will have to get built in to make all of that happen. So the efforts that you see before us have taken a lot of what we've heard and attempt to blend it into a plan that works best for what we feel is best for the community's interests as a whole.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, as a follow-up, if I could?
Certainly.
So, Mr. Treble, I guess let's take the storm water management pond, and actually they're very close in proximity to each other. You know, the one is fronting onto Highway 20, and another one is just pushed back a little bit to the north. So, given the question I just gave you a second, and thank you for that answer, because it was a very, very good answer. Is that the type of thing that if we approve here tonight, that can't be changed? I guess is what I'm like. I guess I'm uncertain with the level of detail, what can be shifted, what could be moved, and what can be tweaked. Can you answer that, Mr. Treble?
I can answer, through you, Madam Chair, I can answer that with some limitation. Any of the applications that come forward will require a stormwater management report or a brief or some kind of documentation to help justify the size, scale, capacity of the stormwater plan. And the language of the policies are such that the adjustments of that can occur at the time of the site plan and the subdivision and whatever kind of planning application you're envisioning. So Mr. Chiarella asked me that very question on Friday, and my answer to him was, yes, I believe we can work with him to attempt to determine that. If at the end of the day, that location seems to be implemented most appropriately by the storm pond being closer to the road, then that's a discussion we can have, and ultimately this council approves.
Madam Chair, those are all my questions for now. Thank you.
For now, yes. We had said that Mr. Treble would do a preamble of the discussion of what next and how we can expect it to roll out, and what the changes to the OMB, et cetera, are going to have on this plan, or maybe not at all. Is this the appropriate time for us to go through just a brief overview of that, Mr. Treble, and then that might answer some of the questions that are sitting out there?
I can do a very high-level overview. What we've achieved is a plan that it's on the screen now in front of council and the public, that includes some recognition of existing ownership pieces or issues, notwithstanding the fact that that's not really the overall goal. The goal of this project was to look at the bigger picture planning of how best to develop an area, and hope that the individual parcel interests could align in such a way as to make implementation happen. However, we heard very clearly at the last public meeting that the Greek Community Center wanted us to leave them alone effectively. So hence you see a large blue area of institutional on the map before you. And in a second I'll have Garrett put up an alternate map that shows kind of what we foresee or envision should the community center choose to find alternate locations or is no longer necessary or whatever might happen down the road. Secondly, a street on the plan labeled Street H is a connecting link to Regional Road 20. No connection of that size or location, was proposed in the original versions because Streamside Drive was identified as sort of the obvious main location for a linkage. However, we heard at the last public meeting that there was concerns that the large 25-acre, mainly residential parcel was difficult to develop without an additional street because of its lack of frontage on, or lack of road frontage that was actually part of their ownership. Similarly, Madam Chair, as parts of the discussion at the last meeting, and we followed up with some of the agencies, we heard that closing of South Grimsby Road 5, although maybe a preferred planning concept, has some limitations to it, some of which I fully understand. We can see traffic volumes and demand for traffic on South Grimsby 5 increasing over time, especially until something like an overpass across the CP rail lands is to eventually get built, and that's going to take some development charge collection for a while. So South Grimsby 5 will probably increase in its capacity and use, and therefore blocking it off at the railway tracks certainly in the short term is not practical. Further, from an emergency services point of view, our fire chief expressed concerns, at least in the short term, that he would need South Grimsby 5 to provide access of going, say, through Van Woudenberg Way or some other residential area to get access into this area for his services. Additionally, this has been something that's been on the burner for a long time. The plan really has to be something that works with CP Rail. They don't tend to say what are the township's needs and we'll achieve them. It's pretty much we have a very high threshold of keeping our track moving and the freight on the track moving, and whatever you do needs to not increase or I guess increase the impact to our system. So unless we close probably 2 crossings, we will be building an overpass or an underpass at South Grimsby 6 where it connects to Spring Creek Road. And the location for 2 crossing closings isn't really obvious until we know exactly how much growth and where the growth would be in the next round of potential expansion for West Lincoln. So, Madam Chair, the plan, as I say, attempts to deal with a number of the concerns and attempts to achieve density targets that the province has recommended to us, and of course that's something that's in transition as we speak as well. This plan easily achieves a density of 50 people and jobs per hectare. In fact, I had our consultants estimate what they believe could be the number of housing counts in the area, and it's approaching the 800 housing unit number in order to achieve those density targets. The other piece, Madam Chair, that you asked me to speak to just really briefly is the OMB, and of course the process for changing the OMB is just kind of officially beginning with the introduction of a bill in Queen's Park. However, based on what I have read so far, if this plan was to be approved once the new bill is approved, the secondary plan would have no appeal option to it. It would be approved by council, and that would be the end of the process. The province appears to be putting much more weight and much more responsibility on councils to be making good decisions and then not allowing them to be overturned by a provincial body of any sort. Secondly, another piece of the puzzle that was kind of interesting and not meant in any way negative to anyone in the room tonight, but the interim control bylaw, if we were introducing that under the new rules, there would be no option for appeal in the first year. So council has the right to use a fairly powerful tool like the interim control process, and it gives you a full year without having to defend your passage of your bylaw before the OMB. So those are a couple of differences if we were proceeding in the future versus proceeding with this plan now. Having said all of that, Madam Chair, I still stand before you tonight to recommend that the plan that's here has flexibility in it, but is an appropriate plan to proceed forward with.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. I guess what I wanted committee and the public to hear is that the future of planning is putting more control at the local level and if the local level has taken the appropriate steps and put in the policies, there is really a lot of appeal that will be out there. So doing it right and making sure we hear from everyone and once we put it in place is what we expect to get.
One of the other challenges, Madam Chair, just to sort of put on the table, when we went to the OMB, the region and the OMB, I guess I should say, to get these lands into the urban boundary, we argued their need on the basis of the fact that we had a shortage of lands for low-density residential development. Now that we're in the point of implementing the development plans for the area, we have to achieve the 50 people and jobs per hectare, which some people may not consider low density, but that's the nature set that we're working within. So, certainly from a developer's point of view, and I understand fully, the more units that they can achieve, the more viable and economical the development is. But we've attempted to blend what our need was with the lower density with the policy set and build that into the plan before you as well.
Thank you. Okay, so I have Council. You were done, Mayor Joyner, for now.
I was done.
All right, so Councillor Rayner, you were next on the speakers list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a little bit difficult for me, as you know, as a supporter of agriculture, to see this agricultural land being lost for development. But I also appreciate how Mr. Treble has taken the time and the effort to maximize the best potential with regards to the consideration of how things should be laid out and how it could be functional in the future, so that, as he says, we don't end up with situations where we end up getting a piece of a corner because that's what the developer wants to give us. He's being careful to make sure that we're maximizing it to the benefit of what the people who live here and respect to staff to look after the situation, so that when this thing is totally laid out, it's the best scenario we could get with the best forethought of the future and how it relates to everything else. And that, to me, is some consolation for the fact that, indeed, it's still difficult in an agricultural community like West Lincoln to lose some of the agricultural land. Mr. Treble, further to that statement that you just made through the chairman, you mentioned initially when this started, it was based on a low density. And there was a lot of discussion by the people who presented tonight that there would be some low density, some medium density, some high density. So does that mean that because this process started when the province was not so concerned about the 50 per hectare or whatever the situation is there flexibility, and that's why the presentation is the way it is now and not as dense as it potentially could be?
Through you, Madam Chair, the presentation before you is a plan that at a minimum achieves 50. But if council sees plans come forward, or subdivision applications or condominium applications come forward that achieve higher densities and they seem appropriate, the policies are written to allow for that to occur. We can't go below 50 people and jobs per hectare, but we can certainly go above the 50. But it's structured in such a way that this council would evaluate those applications when they come forward.
So, Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Treble, so we can still have some single units. It doesn't have to all be into townhouses or condominiums or whatever. There still can be some separate units, some single homes and that sort of situation in the layout. Is that not correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, the density of 50 certainly does allow for some singles, yes. Okay. Probably not on 50 or 60 foot wide frontages. They're more likely on 30 or 40 foot wide frontages, but certainly their singles are a component of this plan.
Okay. That again is a little more reassuring too. Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Treble, this presentation by the Greek community, and I'm a little puzzled by their comment. They said that the institutional zoning is now being changed to developmental zoning, and then they said this is a new development zone on our site was not presented at a previous public meeting. Can you update members of committee with regards to this change from institutional to development?
Through you, Madam Chair, that that specific question probably is more appropriate for the next report, but I'm happy to speak to the overall context now so that we have it on the table. The two letters provided by Maria are one related to this report and one related to the next one. As we heard it at the public meeting, and the words actually came out of Kelly's mouth earlier in her presentation, they asked for recognition of their existing use. That's exactly what I wrote down from what Kelly's presentation was, and that's what I recall as well. So the proposal before us tonight is that the designation in the official plan attached to this report would put the property into an institutional category, which allows for the continued use of the property for the uses that they are currently proceeding forward with. I think where the concern appears to lie is in the zoning bylaw, the next document. And what staff and our consultant there have done is we have put in place zoning that we feel best implements the whole of the township, but in specific, the secondary plan area. In the secondary plan area, because we don't know what the densities might be that come forward in each individual application, and because we don't know the layout of internal condo streets and whatnot, I've recommended to council that we zone the whole of the secondary plan into a development zone or a D zone. That zone effectively says what's on the land now is permitted. Should you choose to come forward, you'll have to identify your appropriate zone category, and that zoning would go through a public meeting process to be put in place at the same time as your development application, be it a subdivision or whatever. That applies broadly across the whole of the secondary plan area. So we treated the Greek community property no differently. The institutional zoning allows for homes for the aged, allows for hospitals, allows for a broad list of zoning categories. When we heard them request at the public meeting in March that they wanted recognition for their existing use, the best zone for that is the development zone, because that allows them to continue the uses that are there now. It allows them to repair and renovate and strengthen their buildings as they exist now. But should they wish to do a retirement facility or something of that nature that's also permitted in that institutional zone, they would then have to come back before council and have that discussion here to make sure that that's an appropriate use for that property in the context of what's happening around it. So I don't believe that we've taken away anything that they asked for. The public meeting for the zoning was in February. They did not attend. The public meeting was in March for the secondary plan. They attended and asked us to recognize existing use. That's what we're doing through the combined review of both of these documents.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Councilor Rayner.
Thank you. Mr. Treble, so you're saying that development zoning is the better zoning than institutional because it allows them to do what they're doing now?
Development zoning is the better zoning for the township to control the future. Development zoning requires that the applicants come back before this council. Development zoning may not be the zoning that's most attractive for the property owner because they want the flexibility maybe to be able to sell it for a retirement facility or whatnot. But I would suggest that we want a development zoning in place so that we have a say over if those changes to that property are to occur down the road.
But make that very clear. We are respecting what it is we've been asked to do in maintaining the existing use on the property
That is correct.
and into the future. But a process yet to be determined by the applicant of the owner of the land in the future. It's a process, and it will be brought forward, and it is not keeping them in an institutional zone for the rest of eternity.
No, Madam Chair, that's correct. The process going forward, should the Greek Community Center no longer need the lands, declare it surplus, whatever terminology is appropriate, there's policy sets in there that talk about official plan processes and whatnot to change the designations. In fact, attached to the staff report at attachment number 7 is a plan that we envision being the one that could potentially be developed on that property in the future. And it's like the piece of the puzzle. I think it was Mr. puzzle. It's like filling in the puzzle. So in the plan that's here, this is not the one we're asking you to approve tonight because the one tonight has that blue institutional designation. But in the future, we're suggesting that something like this could be the plan that unfolds on the property, where you see the linkage of Streamside Drive actually continue, and you see the existing uses of the adjacent lands effectively just consume that whole property. So future development of this property could in fact include high-density residential and medium-density residential, as well as perhaps commercial if we have an expansion of the urban boundary by that point in time.
Point of clarity, Madam Chair, could Mr. Treble tell us that page number, please, of what he just mentioned?
Sure.
It's through you, Madam Chair. It's attachment number 5 to the staff, sorry, number 7 to the staff report. It's on the screen in front of us right now for guidance, and it looks like it's page 524.
Thank you. Page 524. Councillor Rayner, you still have the floor. Sorry, I apologize for that walk down the lane.
I understand what Mr. Mayor wants. My interpretation of this tonight was that the Greek community was not happy. They were looking potentially to sell the property because they were not happy because the zoning had been changed to developmental or development, and they weren't comfortable with that. Should they be left as it was under institutional, they would be more willing to stay. That was my interpretation. I could have been totally wrong, but I was looking at this because all of a sudden this thing came up that there may be the possibility now that we may want to sell it. Well, I thought the premise behind we want to sell it was because all of a sudden our zoning got changed. I don't know if I'm reading that the wrong way or not, Madam Chair or Mr. Treble, but
I think tonight we had a new dimension brought into the play in that Mr. Arians mentioned that they were in a position to put an offer, that they have an offer with the Greek community. So I hear where you're coming from, maybe.
But I think the premise behind that was the fact that they're upset that the zoning has been changed, and that was the premise behind, well, maybe we should move. I certainly don't want them to move. They've always been there as long as the 35 years I've been in West Lincoln, and I don't like to see people almost like they're forced out, and that's kind of what it feels like to me. So I'm not sure, Mr. Treble, have you spoken to them with regards to this? You're telling me the development zoning on that makes absolutely no changes to what they're doing right now. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is 100% correct. The zoning of developmental does not change or take away anything that they're doing right now on the property.
And Madam Chair, the reason I thought this letter came out was I thought they felt it did, and that's why now they're thinking maybe of selling because they don't like the word development. They were quite happy with the zoning of institutional. I don't know if they should be asked directly. They're here tonight, Madam Chair.
I think at the appropriate time we'll allow, we will
I just
allow
wanted to get this
clarity for all these things. I think we're trying to understand some of what it is that's brought us here. And
'Cause
Mr.
I'm not-
Treble's trying his darndest to explain it the way he's worked through it. So I see that there's concerns from several people in the audience wanting to give what they thought was occurring. So just if you'll give us a minute until I've got Councillor Rayner on the floor right at the moment, I'm going to let him speak, and I'm going to ask Mr. Treble, and we'll move from there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's basically all I had. I just had a concern that maybe misunderstanding with the zoning and what it implies could make a decision that down the road wasn't necessary because they misinterpreted it.
Okay. Sorry, I've lost my place on my agenda, so I'll get there eventually. Mr. Treble.
So, Madam Chair, just for the record, the zoning bylaw process and the secondary plan process have been unfolding for years. We have had consultations on both the zoning bylaw and the secondary plan on multiple occasions, far more than the minimum required by the Planning Act in each situation. In the aspect of the secondary plan, it is 100% clear that the Greek community has participated in that process. Their message has changed slightly over time, but the message, the last public meeting, was a very clear, we're not sure how long we will need the lands, but at this point in time, we have no intention of selling the lands. We want them left for a Greek community center into the future. And as I said, Kelly's language in her presentation was recognition of their existing institutional use. With respect to the new zoning bylaw process, we have held 3 open houses and 2 public meetings on that process, and the Greek community never participated in those discussions. So the only input I have is the input that was provided in March at the last consultation on the secondary plan. That was a month after the public meeting for the zoning bylaw. So when I heard in March that the intent was to leave us recognized as what we're doing, the development zoning achieves all of that. And there is no reason that an institutional zoning is needed, and there is basically a bit of a too broad a brush, I would advise council, if the institutional zoning was left on the property. It would be best if council had the development zoning so that you could see the nature of applications if they were to come forward on that property or any other property.
So the culmination of a
township.
number of years' work is coming to the table tonight, and we've got a zoning bylaw and we've got a secondary plan. Mr. Treble is trying to balance both with tomorrow we're going to have a new zoning bylaw as well as a new secondary plan. There's still lots of time to do the tweaking because no one knows whether the road is 45 meters or 32 meters or whatever it is, and how, so there'll be tweaking. Remember, we tweak a lot. So the issue here is that we are trying to accommodate everybody's wishes. With 2 things that are happening. We do the secondary plan, we do the zoning bylaw. So what we have in place for the past 40 years in zoning is going to be out the window if we pass a new zoning bylaw. So now the new terms may feel constrictive to the property owners, including the Greek Community Hall, right?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Treble, are you referring to the zoning bylaw that was passed in 1979? Is that the one?
That is the one that we're hoping to update with a new bylaw. Yes.
Tonight. That is before us after this item. So we deal with the secondary plan. Mr. Treble, am I correct, and I don't mean to preempt Councillor Rayner, but we could pre-zone all of the land in our secondary plan area, could we not?
We could do pre-zoning, yes. I am not recommending that. I'm recommending the development zoning. I'm going to say something that is not a tale out of school. City of St. Catharines did some pre-zoning in that city to allow for intensification by changing the zoning standards inside their residential areas, and I'm not sure if anyone's been following the news. That doesn't tend to be working very well in that city right now because there's a lot of the community up in arms about the intensification concepts going forward. Right. So the approach in this document is to put in place provisions that require those applications to come before council to be vetted through a public process so that the planned development has been discussed in a public forum before being approved and not following the concept of pre-zoning in that regard.
Okay,
Thank
so
you, Madam Chair. I
that's where we're at, okay?
Thank you very much.
Now, I have no one else on my speakers list. So is there any questions? And is it, I know that there's members of the community that are anxious to answer questions if we have any. Do we need a 2-minute break? I said, do we need a 2-minute break? It's okay, just a minute. Yes, yes. Okay, so then in that case, I have some questions if I see none of my colleagues wishing to ask any. And I'll be happy to put myself aside or whatever the wish is. But Mr. Treble, this is a plan for the ultimate build-out. You've said that, and that would that be the appropriate way to characterize what it is we're doing today with no regard, well, some regard for land ownership, but this is for the good of this town?
The plan is done for the good of the township. That is correct, Madam Chair. It is, though, tweaked since March to attempt to accommodate some of the interests that seem to have challenges without our assistance in terms of being able to proceed and protect their future aspirations.
Holdouts or people with lands wishing to maintain their existing usage, that's what you're talking about. So we've tried to accommodate those people as best we could.
That's correct, but still through that attachment 7, having a bit of a vision in terms of how that would even fit, that last piece of the puzzle down the road.
So the fact that it is our plan, we will likely see further, and the fact that the OMB changes will not impact this plan, there will be open discussion with landowners and ourselves to further refine our plans as subdivisions and site plans come in. And for the lands inside that secondary planning area, the developers, there may not be a developers group, and we may have rogue developers talking with one another rather than as a group, but in a more sophisticated, as your report, and I've lost the page, 523 or something, said, our development community is going to have to become more receptive to discussing things with themselves, to settle a number of internal issues like cost, access, and various other things that are going to cause, like if you need an access and you didn't buy it, but your land's trapped, you're going to have to buy or come to an agreement with the guys next door. And if they really hold out, you may get into a bit of a problem till you can resolve it.
Shared services agreements and things of that nature are pretty common in this day and
Everywhere.
age. So that's right, Madam Chair.
Okay, so, and our plan may look at other people's plans, but we may not want linear parks, or we may not want remnant parcels, or pieces of land that are triangles. We may choose to do different things, and as we move forward, our stormwater management ponds might reduce in size because we put holding tanks in, or filters and various other buffering opportunities to manage stormwater in different ways. So we may not, and we are likely not going to want to have 2 or 3 stormwater management ponds because they cost the township. In the long term, we take over maintenance and control of those, do we not?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, storm ponds usually end up the ownership of the township unless they're, I guess, a condo development. They'd be private at that point.
So if we need an interim stormwater management pond because someone wants to go ahead and they agree that they'll put it in at their expense, we may let them go ahead. But at the ultimate, we may want the stormwater management pond where we want it, use it as a bit of a feature, and put it where it's most cost effective in the long run for the township to assume.
The challenge with all of these services is the fact that we're probably servicing for an area broader than the individual property where the pond is actually situated, and that is exactly the case here. The storm pond could in fact be trying to service lands further to the north than we're even looking at inside our urban boundary right now. That possibility exists, so we don't want to do anything that takes away from what's in the long-term best interests of the community as a whole.
So this land coming into our, through an official plan amendment, into our urban boundaries, and now being available to have a secondary plan approved at some point, was the result of a settlement of an OMB hearing that brought forward an agreement upon these lands, which eliminated a number of appeals by a number of landowners. Am I right?
That is correct. That was
Okay.
settled in 2015.
So just like those discussions took place to agree that we would settle this OMB hearing by the landowners coming to an agreement with one another, the landowners need to be able to work with one another to bring forward cost sharing and various other kinds of agreements among themselves, not necessarily privileged to us unless they want to use best efforts, which is frowned upon by a number of landowners these days. But that settlement that they brought forward that agreed that this is how they would bring, these lands would be acceptable to them without a hearing, we need them to go back and work with each other rather than coming to us. Am I correct? Or that would be beneficial to all?
There's no question that the best way to proceed forward is if all of the property owners are at the table. That's correct.
So, and it's not normally something that's facilitated by the town, but we'd be happy to help them along if we had. So if the Greek Community Center has already had discussion with others of the landowners to resolve that, how could we assist them?
Fair enough, Madam Chair. I think it's great that Mars Homes and the Greek community and Brian Owen, there's discussions that are going on between those parties right now. I believe there's also discussions with some of the property owners along South Grimsby 5 that own those small lots, the 8 small lots that are often testamentary devised lots over there. So I know that there are discussions going on, and that's exactly what I want to happen, so that things can coalesce into a plan that's best for the community and more in keeping with with what's before us here tonight. There's only really one property owner, Madam Chair, that I'm aware of that hasn't really been part of the process to date, and that's the lands at the very furthest west end nearest the roundabout. I'm not aware
Beyond the
that
Greek Community Center?
beyond the Greeks. That's right. I haven't heard yet where they are part of any discussions or dialogue.
Okay, so if there's single-loaded roads, and let's put this, if the Greek Community Center stayed for 20 years and then ultimately decided they wanted to go through a process that would allow for them to be urbanized, to move to something else, whatever the zoning would allow and whatever process they chose to get through, it would mean if there were single-loaded roads that had to be built now to accommodate growth, at the appropriate time that they would come forward, the developer of those lands would have to pay for their proportionate share of that single-loaded road, right?
Well, or alternately, Madam Chair, and certainly I don't think any of us in these discussions right now have been party to the discussions between Mars and the Greek Community Center, but if there is discussions about conveyance of a wedge of land, which aligns with the plan that we saw from Mr. Arians, what says that there isn't the possibility of discussion of a more parallel piece across the back? Then it's not a single loaded road.
I was getting there, yeah. Go ahead.
Right. So there is discussions that are ongoing. I don't know why those discussions are locked into only Mr. Arians' concept for that road. That's not made clear to me. In addition, in Mr. Arians' own plan, he had a single loaded road back in behind Brian Owen's commercial development on the plan that was just presented tonight. I don't have a copy of it with me, but so, you know, it's not preferred. I get that. It's better and more economical if you can have access on both sides, but ultimately it can be achieved in this particular instance. The Greek Community Center property may not be available right now, but could be down the road.
And it'll go through a process, public as well as their planners. Now, if I were to look back, and this is a test of my memory and yours as well, when we looked at the OP and we looked at those lands coming in, we saw a concept, I say strongly concept, of what those lands could look like. It was a lovely opportunity with live, work, and 3- and 5-story buildings. It was a great picture. Thank you, Mr. Arians, and I think at that date you got a lot of congratulations on it. Would it be fair to say that today's concept plans would not necessarily result in that very same picture happening?
Madam
As we
Chair,
move into the secondary plan for that?
there's a lot of opportunity for something very similar.
Thank you. Sometimes you just ask the question to get the answer, you know? So all of what it is we're doing is we're going down, if we were at 30,000 feet, we're coming down in granular dimensions down to something closer, and we are still going to have discussions. But the most important discussions after we approve this plan are really between all of the landowners so that they can decide how they're going to do the things that we are not going to do for them.
That would be correct, Madam Chair. And Mr. Arians and Ms. Bonamici are both already working on those next levels at the more detailed stage because of the fact that they've got concepts in mind for plan of condo and plan of subdivision applications to be submitted. So some of that detailed analysis that gets in far more intricately than this plan is already underway with the IBI group.
The major landowners.
And the landowners.
So I'm going to stop there because that was my questions, but I have more, and I will respect my colleagues. Councillor Bilsma, next.
Thank you very much. I guess the chief concern that I have really just has to do with the crossings. I'm fearful at this point to commit to a grade separated crossing. I understand CP's, conviction that they'll swap crossings, but they don't want to add crossings. And very clearly, many of the plans,
At grade crossings.
grade crossings, yeah, increasing them. And this plan is trying to finesse two such crossings, and one of them that could be at grade and one of them could be grade separated in order to get the people across, not necessarily anyways, long story short, I want to make sure that we understand that grade separation, that does that, are we committing to one of those by approving this?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, we're not. It simply indicates the fact that that could be a possibility.
Okay.
It does indicate as well that in the policies as written, it does indicate as well that the closing of South Grimsby Road 5 may be appropriate down the road. So that's there as a may as well. So, when we get closer to the day of being able to figure out whether we want an at-grade crossing or whether we are going to go with an above-grade, you'll start to get into detailed discussions with CP at that point, and they will tell you what you will do in order to achieve that new crossing. Discussions about a year ago, or in the range of a year ago, certainly indicated that if you want another at-grade, you're probably giving up 2 to get 1. If you want to keep what you've got, then you need to start going above grade. And they have distances between crossings and all sorts of standards. Depends on if they have arms and all of that kind of stuff. There's quite an elaborate discussion that will have to unfold before we lock into any particular design.
Okay, so we're not locked in. I'm comfortable with that. Okay, thanks. That's all.
Okay, so there is some rumbling in the room from members of the community that have a large stake in this, and I'm looking to my colleagues. I'm not asking for these people to come forward, but is there anything that that you need clarification from the various people? There's been all kinds of public input. There's been all kinds of meetings. There's been public meetings on our zoning. There's been public meetings on this secondary plan. And without leading us to that, is there anything, Mayor Joyner?
So you're absolutely right, Madam Chair. There is some rumblings in the room. If it's okay with council, I would ask that only the people who have presented before us today be allowed to ask questions. So that would be Mr. Arians.
I think it's clarification. We're not looking for questions. I think we're looking for clarification of
Well,
what we
call it
may-
what you want.
Yeah.
Questions, clarification, I don't care. But it would be Ms. Bonamici, Mr. Arians,
Anyone who spoke.
Ms. Apostolakis, and
That's a
no, Mr. McCree, you didn't speak. So
Mr. Ellis. Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Ellis too as well. And I would add that Mr. Owens be allowed to as well, because he is one of the principal owners in here, if that's okay with council.
So we're going to let the principal owners that are in the room speak, even if they weren't here earlier. I think that would be appropriate. We see with anyone who's here who owns property, will allow them to speak. Now,
But Madam Chair, Ms. Apostolakis is the person who has been speaking
I
for the Greek
understand.
Hall.
I understand.
Thank
so,
you.
So what we're saying, just to get to the wishes, is we're going to let anyone who owns land speak, but the people who spoke on behalf of the land are the ones who are going to come forward. So if you have comments as the Greek Community Hall, if we could put them all into one person so that we don't have 5 people speaking for that, Mr. Arians and Ms. Bonamici will speak on their behalf. Mr. Owens, if there's anything, if there's points that you need to bring to our attention, we've read, the members of committee have read the secondary plan. We've had lots of opportunity to make it understood, but this is your chance, because I saw some great activity about some of what you think we may understand. So if you want to set some things straight, come forward, and we'll then turn it back to our staff to give any additional comments they have. Mr. Arians, please come forward. Where's that picture?
Thank you for the opportunity. Angela's just...
Ms. Bonamici, I finally learned how to say her name. Ms. Bonamici
Ms.
is...
Bonamici is going to load up the Mars concept, and I just have a few comments to make about that. And I was really pleased to hear Maria's presentation, because she confirmed that the Greek community supports the Mars concept. It basically leaves their property intact as it sits today, but for a minor strip of land. And when I said Mars is entertaining and there's an offer of purchase, it wasn't for the entire Greek community property. It was just for...
Sorry, I didn't mean to suggest that it was the entire Greek community.
You
Now
can
you
see
can
it
make
on
it
the
clear.
slide, there's a triangle here, it's 0.48 of an acres, and that's all that the Greek community was really willing to sell, and that's all that's really on the table. Mr. Treble is correct, in 20 years from now, if there was a road along this side, then there might be an opportunity to develop that parcel. But that opportunity is not there today. It doesn't exist today. And that's what we're reacting to. You have a secondary plan, and there has to be a realistic assumption that this plan will be implemented. And it takes the cooperation of the property owners to make that happen. And that's all that's on the table, is that 0.4 of an acre parcel of land that the Greeks are willing to convey to Mars. If we wait for the balance to happen, the Mars subdivision will be incomplete. Your people will be living with, half a road or half a development without the complete community that we're trying to achieve. Mr. Treble was absolutely correct. There is an open side of road allowance here. It's unavoidable. And that is the cost sometimes of doing that development. But as soon as we could, we turned that road to get away from Mr. Owen's property here, because this is where the region wants a balancing act. We would prefer this road to go straight, and there would be development on this side. But the region won't allow that. So again, it's a balancing act of different interests that we're all trying to achieve. And these aren't remnant lands. This is the concept that staff have developed. They wanted a parkette. The main park is at the community center facility, not in this particular quadrant of the neighborhood. And trails and linkages will be provided along here and through these condo roads to connect to that parkland. So, there are parts that we can add, there are parts that we can give, and we're hoping for that opportunity between now and council. The main thing is, the concept that's being before you today has another street that comes up here and connects this way, and this street is actually lower. We can't, if you approve the secondary plan, based on the new changes to the Planning Act, we cannot come with the draft plan of subdivision and ask you to amend this plan. We're locked in. So yes, there's flexibility, but there isn't. We have to wait. When you adopt a secondary plan, Bill 73 requires this mandatory, I think it's a 2-year period, that no amendments can be made.
That's correct, but it's only in first reading, so let's just put them
No,
in.
this is Bill 73, which is already approved. And that's our problem. The plan has to be implemented, and that's part of our frustrations. When we're down at this level and we're saying, hey, wait a minute, guys, take a look over here, because we can't do it this way. That's why we're here.
We have your points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bonamici, did you want to speak to this, or was that capturing all the comments? I'm not trying to force you. I'm just going to go through the group of people that spoke, and if anyone wishes to come back up. Maria, did you want to come up? Come on.
Madam Chair, Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you very much for the opportunity to allow us to come back up here to make some clarifications. There's been a lot of talk, not just in this room, but around town. And I was just speaking with the president not too long ago, and he wanted me to stress this, is that we're not planning on moving. We're not planning on selling our entire property. We're going to be there for quite a while until the last member drops. Just to be clear, because there's been a lot of talk everywhere. There were a couple comments that Mr. Treble made that didn't quite sit well. And, you actually,
Councillor Rayner.
Well, it was Mr. Tremble's comments. Okay. You were speaking on the developmental zoning. We didn't find out about that zoning until this morning when the plan was changed online. Up to this date, it was always as institutional, and we didn't feel there was any comments to be made because it was always institutional. This developmental thing was a surprise to us, and we actually haven't had time to talk to our planner in detail about that and how it truly will affect us. So we have concerns about zoning it developmental in the bylaws. Is it the bylaws? I'm not sure if
Zoning.
the zoning bylaws. Also in the policy, and correct me if I'm wrong. In March, when the secondary plan was presented, we were okay with the institutional requirements that were in the secondary plan. But since March, they've changed, and it affects our property. And there's quite a few things in here that we don't agree with. For example, it states in the current one, which we haven't had a chance to comment on.
The current zoning bylaw, the one from 79?
Sorry, is it policies? Can I show you?
Madam Chair, I think she's referring to the draft official plan amendment that's being presented tonight. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just want to make sure, because the zoning bylaw in effect right now has been there since 79. So you're looking at the official plan amendment for the secondary plan?
Yes.
Okay.
That, from the March 13th meeting, that has been changed. And we didn't see the changes until Friday. So we haven't had the opportunity to comment on it or to even have the discussions with Mr. Trumbull. So in point number 3, any future redevelopment of lands legally described as PCL 8-1, as confirmed by the old one. I didn't bring it. 1695, municipally known as 6695 Highway 20, will require an official plan amendment and shall have regard to the general land use patterns identified on Schedule A, including the identified local road pattern. The issues that we have is in the next sentence. Any redevelopment proposals on these lands shall include a road connection via an extension of Streamside Drive, and future development will require consideration of stormwater management options. We haven't had a chance to explore this.
Okay, hang on. Do you have a planner?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and the planner has been involved?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, because you did say in these letters that these were prepared by your planner. Okay, so your planner's been involved and worked with our staff?
Yes.
Okay, so is there a disconnect between the planner and reporting back to the board?
Well, there's no disconnect. This
Okay.
appeared Friday afternoon
Okay.
on the website.
So, Mr. Treble, could you maybe explain what has happened since before Friday?
Two parts, Madam Chair. As I say, the policy message and the plan message in March was to recognize and protect their existing use.
Right.
So with that in mind, the provisions that are before you tonight have been prepared. The language that is being referred to by Maria is in the event that the use of the Greek Community Center ceases and new uses are proposed for the lands.
Right.
Those new uses would be uses that would be on presumably a raw piece of land at that point.
Right.
And we're trying to implement that pattern I showed you on attachment 7. So the street is not being proposed until the Greek Community Center relinquishes their desire to use it for that purpose. At that point, the plan will be developed in a way that's in keeping with the piece of the puzzle that's missing in the plan being approved tonight. We're not telling them the street has to be put in while the community center's there. It's later.
So, this wasn't a surprise on Friday. That's, I guess, the thing that is of concern.
I have had, through you, Madam Chair, I've had discussions with Jennifer Vita from Upper Canada as well as Ken Gagnon from Upper Canada. The challenge that we have, and the mayor and the CAO are familiar with this issue. There is a requirement, I'm not sure whether it's in a policy or where it is, but there's a requirement that we are not to release documentation until 4 o'clock on Friday. So the discussions I have had with Mr. Gagnon and Ms. Vita have indicated that what they're reading isn't the latest version.
I see.
But I couldn't give them and say, here you go. And we had that discussion with respect to another interest, not the Greek Community Center interest. However, the other piece of the puzzle is the fact that I did reach out to Jennifer Vita and Ken Gagne back a month and a half, 6 weeks ago, somewhere in there, asking for further input, and I got nothing. So in the absence of that information, we proceeded based on what we understood to be the Greeks' interest, that they want to leave the land for their use, for the current situation, for the time being, and at such point as down the road, when they no longer have an interest, then we've put provisions in place that say what should happen then.
So from March 13th, we've had a series of meetings ongoing with all of the landowners at various times. Your consultants and the township have put together their plan, and I see, out of respect or out of courtesy to council, we release the documents to council at the same time as we give it to the public. But that doesn't say you haven't had the discussions with the landowners to understand the concerns and to capture and perhaps even look at language in some aspects for elements of this revision.
There have been ongoing discussions with multiple interests in that regard, that's right.
Okay. So this is a big decision for this community, 37 hectares, I think it was, and how do you plan it? And we want to get it right. We certainly want to have, but having the planner understand and look at this, I have to say we need to give you time, but we also want to have those people here so that they can explain their concerns and we can resolve any of these outstanding issues. So we need your planner to be here with our staff as well.
Our planner is here with the staff, and I'm actually very surprised that you would say that he didn't get back to you because our planner is very good.
We're not suggesting that he's not, and look, we're not going to point arrows. What I'm saying is that if there's not been any meetings, then we've got an issue. We're not saying he has to be here with us. We have to say he's here with us, I mean, in the entirety of the plan. He has to be up to speed at where we're at. So if there's been ongoing meetings, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that we're trying to keep your lands in the way we understood you wanted your lands to be retained.
True, but this, what I read before, just came up, so it was a surprise to our planner.
Okay.
Also, the developmental designation was also a surprise to our planner. There were no discussions prior to it.
Okay.
Your developer was told on Thursday when I met with him most recently.
Okay.
On Thursday, but Friday, when the documents were posted, it was surprise to him that on the zoning bylaw, it was listed as institutional.
So I don't want to get into a match right at the moment. Is it fair to say that the new term for the kind of land that we're proposing the Greek Community Center be characterized at in your secondary plan is a result of the new zoning bylaw coming forward?
I'm not sure, Madam Chair. I think what it's fair to say is that we have done what they asked for and we have protected their interest.
Okay. So one can always say that, you know, we think we've got everybody on side, and no matter what we do, we can try and it becomes difficult to get these things forward. We hear your concerns. I've heard your concerns. I think the members of this committee have heard your concerns. At this point in time, I'm looking for questions of our staff, questions of our staff regarding this particular element, or I'm going to go to the next speaker. And if I see no questions by members of the committee, I'd like to get the next speaker to come up. I understand, and we seem to have a difference of opinion. We'll deal with that at the end of this session. We understand. We're hearing you. We're coming to the end of a process, and everybody's concerned about how it affects them. So we offered opportunity to anyone who had land that is here tonight to have a chance to speak to us. So I'm going to have to move on. Thank you very much, and we will get back to this. Now, is that what the problem is? Sorry, I'm being told we have a technical issue, so we don't know why that microphone isn't working. It may just be the articulation, so we'll try that one. Otherwise, go to the one where the laptop is. Ms. Bonamici, if you'd like to come forward. Oh, look at that. The acting CAO has got magic hands.
Okay, so just quickly, I'd like to state, with the 14 acres, really, we're very close to what is being proposed by staff and what we've been looking at and trying to make work. Really, it is just a realignment of the road. And due to Spring Creek Road going to be a collector road, you don't want multiple access, driveway access on that road. So we're proposing a window street, which, based on staff's concept, wouldn't allow for that. And I understand they talk about flexibility of the road, and it's not set in their plan. However, if it is designated low density, that is set. And then we'll be kind of locked into definitely putting singles. And by the future development of Spring Creek Road, it wouldn't allow for that window street. We've done the math kind of, and so with the medium density, you would allow for the flexibility, and it's not saying that it has to be townhouses. We still have semis and singles as an option. So I just kind of wanted to reiterate that point. Like, yeah, we're just looking for just an alteration of Street A. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Treble, at some point before, and it may not be tonight, but could you give this committee a map of the land ownership again?
Certainly.
Because some of it seems to have angulation based on ownership. Is what I'm
Angulation
seeing.
is a very good
Is that a
word
good
for this
way?
area.
Yeah, angulation.
It's probably the biggest challenge we've had is the fact that there's not a square parcel in the entire development.
So everybody's got the best idea and might just keep what they have to have on their property. And I'm not trying to be prickly or anything, but I'm just noticing some angles where ownership stops. Okay, Mayor Joyner.
I was wanting to know if Ms. Bonamici could use the slide, which shows what we're proposing and what she's proposing, because I think it has a better.
You might wanna see
We
what
understand
happens.
it a little better when we see them both side by each.
Decided by each? No drink a speech. Okay, the temperature's got to go up in here. It's getting cold. I'm freezing.
So, Madam Chair, if I could I question Ms. Bonamici just quickly?
Only if you ask her where her ownership stops. Yes, I'll do that.
So really, Ms. Bonamici, what it comes down to is how many units you can put on each person's design.
Oh.
Is that what it comes down to? Based on what is medium and low and high density?
I suppose. I mean, we're trying to make it best, and I mean, we do have to speak for the people who will live there. It's not, to make the provincial targets as well as desirable and efficient. I mean, I do see low across Spring Creek Road, but how would you access, you won't want multiple driveway access onto that. And it's just, it looks like you would get one row of singles facing Spring Creek and the other facing Street A.
Would you agree, through you, Madam Chair, that we're trying to line up the streets on the north side of the north side of the tracks, sorry. And so the one coming out of the east side of South Grimsby Road 5 lining up at the west side of South Grimsby Road 5. In your diagram, in Dunlow's plan, those two roads don't line up. Would you agree?
Yes, our street would not line up with Street A, but there is potential to line up with Street C.
Oh, I see. No, I see what you mean. But then we would have to change the pattern on the east side of South Grimsby Road 5 then.
Well, it would just be the closure of that road, and you would add more singles
Just
along.
the closure of
I don't know. There is the potential to knock off that road extension on the east side of South Grimsby 5.
Okay, thank you.
So, Ms. Bonamici, does the Township of West Lincoln find itself into a place that is going to be the future of growth in West Niagara? And we are in a conundrum. The price of housing doesn't drive us to the value of land that says we should have underground parking under each of these units, which gives you the opportunity to have far more units. And or stacked townhouses. But, so in other words, that kind of product with underground parking might cost too much. But if the land was that valuable, we wouldn't be looking at above ground parking. So do we find ourselves in a bit of a conundrum? We want to put in more units, as you do, but when it comes to townhouses, we don't want to stack them or look at the new products where the price of land is so much a driver that people go to product that have an underground parking, and then they're able to put more above ground units. So we're not there yet because the land value isn't there yet? Or why is it that, that we're not seeing some of these creative types of thoughts coming out of your head about intensification? I'm not trying to be, I've looked at a lot of product in a lot of municipalities, and I'm just not seeing us trying to do any of those creative things. So that means that we're not there yet?
Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not really understanding. Do you want, are you saying, like, why aren't we having underground parking and stacked townhouses?
Well, I'm saying that the mayor's asking you why you would do your plan versus our plan, and is it simply, I think you were asking, is it the number of units? So would you get more units out of your plan, aside from the road alignment, et cetera? And so I'm asking the question that another way to achieve more units, yeah, you have wide shallows, and then you have all this other different types of product you see in all these municipalities, but another way to look at townhouses, which you were suggesting would be one of the products, would be that you don't have to worry about lanes, you don't have to worry about the condo roads, because you then have underground parking. So you have, you go under the units, everybody has their little thing, and it's a common element. And that way, you don't have to have as much above ground because you put it underground. Is it that our land and our growth is not as, the price of the land isn't just that expensive for you to want to use it so badly for another house and not a garage? I'm trying to get there. Does anybody understand what I'm saying?
Well,
Okay, so if you've got a house and you're going to put houses and you're going to put townhouses up and you're going to have a laneway product and you're going to have a garage, that means you take up more above ground space. Stacked townhouses and these new products that you're seeing in a lot of communities that are facing the same kind of growth as us have got a driveway. It goes to an underground parking garage. So the parking garage is underneath the houses. Now that costs money to build.
Yes.
But then the offset is, if the land is so valuable, you put the parking underneath, you have one driveway in, one driveway out, and everybody goes in the same one, and you don't need as much land for every house. And the density in stacked houses is higher. So I'm just saying, is that we're not there yet because the price of our land is still okay to add the garage and the lane driveway, the condominium road? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think
I'm trying to be bang on to what you were asking.
I think what you're trying to say to Ms. Bonamici is, are we not there yet that you have to really think about how well you intensify the amount of houses that you get on a property? So, for instance, in Bimbrook, you see exactly what Chair Chichuk is looking at, and they're putting in stacked townhomes with the parking underneath them, and therefore you get more units on the acreage that you have or the hectares that you have. She's asking, are we not there yet that you have to worry about that because our land prices aren't as high as other places?
Well, I think at first, the region was looking at making it 80 units per hectare, and they dropped that number down to 50. So I don't think you're there yet. To do like a stacked townhouse with an underground garage, you would be creating a higher density. And I'm not sure if a stacked townhouse is actually desirable in West Lincoln at this point in time.
If I could, so I guess the point here is, Ms. Bonamici, is that, is it that your road design fits what you want to build? So if we come to you and say, well, that's not the road design that we're going to allow you to have, can you not change up the style of singles, towns, condos that you're going to build there in order to achieve the numbers that you need to achieve? Does the road design mean that much at this time?
Can I get the concept back up so you guys? So looking at the recommended plan, there's a dotted line along the tracks, which I believe is the 30-meter setback. So with that, you can't have your privacy area. And the design we had is that the townhouses would be facing the tracks, right? And your amenity area would be protected. Looking at where that is, there is a single lot that will have its privacy area basically facing, and it'll be subject to noise and everything. So we had a concept that shows all the townhouse units facing the tracks to kind of create a wall to buffer the noise and everything from the tracks. That's why you see on our concept, there's just a strip across the southern portion that is all townhouses. They were just meant to be standard townhouses, I think, due to the fact that, you know, we do maintain the density that is required by provincial standards, and I don't think there is a market right now in West Lincoln for stacked. I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm not going to say that,
no.
but yeah. So that's our reasoning for putting townhouses along that. To have the concept that's recommended, it does restrict how close you can get to the tracks, and what kind of design you will have to. I haven't put it into a design yet, but looking at it, I can kind of see it will be difficult, and it probably will make for awkward lot sizes at some point for the actual design layout of the site.
So, Madam Chair, may I ask Mr. Treble one question, quick question?
You go ahead.
Mr. Treble, in our design where you have Street A coming off of South Grimsby Road 5, is there a prerequisite that we have to be so many meters away from the CP rail line? And with Ms. Bonamici's design, does that adhere to that meters away from the CP rail line?
It's kind of a two-part question. I can answer the first part by saying, yes, there are requirements that CP has for setbacks. I cannot confirm if her street and the location proposed would comply or not. I don't know the answer to that tonight, Madam Chair.
Okay, so now, thank you, Ms. Bonamici, and if we have questions or whatever, and just put your hand up, we'll see you there. I'm looking to see if anyone owning land who hasn't spoken yet wishes to speak. And if you don't want to, don't put your hand up. I understand your wish to speak about, but we're talking about the developers and the land in the secondary plan. I'm going to stretch, and I'm going to ask that my colleagues allow me this opportunity because we're going to let you speak.
Madam Chair, if it's new information, though, because I think we've heard Mr. Ellis more than once.
Yes, sir.
But
So Mr. Ellis is going to have a very short rope around what he's going to say.
This is going to be very short. What I'm hearing, I think I can assume that they're building medium-density townhomes on the parcel of land behind, on the north side off Northridge Drive in such a way as to act as a noise barrier. Is that correct?
I think that some of the product that they may intend to put is that they will put the building with the front door at facing the tracks so that people's private amenity area will have the buffering of the house to be away from the tracks.
But also acting as a sound barrier to the behind the townhouses.
Just a second, I'm going to let Mr. Treble answer it because I'm not sure where we're going, but that is in design, and that's not about the secondary plan.
Okay.
Because we're going into far too much detail. I was trying to get the developers to, and I think we've even gone down into too much detail there. So, Mr. Ellis, what's the problem?
I think that's what they're doing is that helps people on the backside, but the people behind, it doesn't do anything for.
I understand.
That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Okay. So,
Just, Madam Chair, if I could, that detail will be a public process, the
I
way
know.
this is set up, right? I just want to make it clear to Mr. Ellis and Mrs. Ellis that those discussions and the design of that development will all be a public process at that point to ensure the proper conditions get in place to address all those issues.
Right.
We're still way up here tonight.
right. And Councillor Bilsma.
I'm kind of looking at the geometry of the two plans side by side by each, and as I see it, really, one plan and our plan, the geometry is aligning closer to the roads that exist. That we're trying to get perpendicular. Our road A is parallel to the Spring Creek Road, and the north-south version is parallel to Grimsby Road 5. So we've maintained a parallel, closer aligned to the road structure of our community, and the Dunlow's plan is keeping the road more parallel to the tracks. And to me, at the end of the day, we still end up with just a smaller triangle of the greater whole. Like we have so it's still a 6 of one, half dozen of the other. We end up just that has to conform to Spring Creek Road and Grimsby Road 5. They still have the constraint of making more or less rectangular lots conform to a triangle. We were always going to run into these, and our director of planning, the fact that we're square lots on a triangular development, and we're always, and it doesn't matter whether we're north of the tracks, south of the tracks. We have these constraints of making rectangular lots fit triangular developments. And we may be splitting hairs here. Somebody has a preference in the roads according to the tracks, and they still have the constraint of a triangle, just a little bit smaller, or our plan, which is trying to maximize rectangularness inside the space of a triangle. All that to say, we may have a point where we're always going to be fighting.
We're always going to disagree. How's that?
Yeah, exactly.
Disagree?
So I'm at 10:04. I don't know whether we're going to come to a solution. So
the issue before us, Councillor
Yeah.
Bilsma, is that it's not the geometry behind this. We have some people who feel they haven't been heard. And that's what I heard tonight. So we were giving him a chance to tell us why it was that we weren't ready to pass this amendment that is fairly substantial in the eyes of West Lincoln. Our staff have been working at this, but unfortunately going down the tracks at the same time is a zoning bylaw that was going to replace a 40-year-old zoning bylaw. But tonight, our Director of Planning is coming forward with his consulting team to say, this plan works regardless of who owns what. And let's look at that ownership plan if you think that you need to know what's going on, because then you might see why some of the angles happen in different ways. So we need to decide, some of the things that have been brought out are, if you don't want to finish this plan, you may have to wait. If you don't like the way it looks, you should take some consideration in. And our staff are saying that they've taken into consideration all those facts, and they think they've preserved the rights of all the landowners, and they've done what was right for the community.
I believe that too.
So that's where we're at, and we have a bit of a conundrum, so we have to continue weighing it. And I think that, I'm going to go to Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You started talking about what I was going to talk about.
Sorry.
No, it's great, because where we're at, this process, we're kind of looking at the bylaws, which we're bringing in, which is a separate issue. We're allowing it to come in to this, and we shouldn't be doing that. This is another issue. Both of them have been ongoing for quite some time. They've been out to the public for quite some time. So I have a tough time when public says, really didn't know about it until 2 weeks ago. Well, it's been out there. We have a problem where we have our planner from the township has worked very hard on this with the developers, with the landowners, with this council and the public. He's brought forward this plan tonight, which we're being asked to move forward with it, and I believe it's a good plan. I also hear from planners, which developers hire, landowners hire, and I guess this is where I get a little confused with the planners. Tonight, for example, and this is no reflection on IBI Group, but they're here with two of the planners representing clients. And what I'm hearing is that, well, we'll work with you guys. We can work with this. We can change this. We can do that. And from our own planner says, yes, even though we approve this plan, should we tonight, there's still room to maneuver and work with things within this plan. And I hear the same thing from IBI Group saying, yeah, we can work with it. We're willing to. But yet at the same token, they're only willing to work if we approve their portion of the plan they want. But yet they turn around and say, well, they're both pretty similar. So if they're that similar, why are we having all this discussion for the last 2 hours? Sorry, that's part of my problem. And you have the developers and the landowners paying these planners to come and do this, and at the end of the day, the original plan that was on the board is acceptable. And I just think that we need to move forward, and let's deal with the question. Let's deal with this part of the plan, and then let's deal with the bylaws after that. They're two separate things we're dealing with, and yet we're trying to combine them, and we're not getting anywhere with it. So I think we need to deal with what's been brought forward by our planning department, and it's all there. It's everything we've asked them for. It's what the public's asked for. They've heard it. They've answered it. So, just a comment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Treble, as to Bill 73, which is the revisions to the OMB. No, sorry.
Bill 73 was approved last year.
Right.
Yes.
It is in place. It was approved, and it is active. Okay.
That's correct. But in order to avoid the concern that Mr. Arians has, the language of the policies talk a lot about may. I think we heard one.
May, yes.
We heard one shall from Maria, but generally there's a lot of may in the policy to give us that flexibility. So I'm not aware of a circumstance so far that is to the point where it's going to take a full amendment to the secondary plan that's proposed. Kelly, Ms. Martell and I have been chatting a little bit about the difference between the two plans that Angela has been discussing as well, and we're of the opinion that there is probably a way that those discussions can carry on and no amendment to the plan is needed. It'll be some adjustments that come before this council. So I think approval of the plan as presented by staff still allows us to have those discussions with Angela about concepts that they have floated out. The bigger issue in her approach versus our approach is if you want the street further south, yes, we have to deal with whether CP will allow it, But the bigger issue is probably forcing the developer on the other side of South Grimsby 5 to align, because we have our public works staff saying we don't want offset intersections and we don't want a lot of driveways on either South Grimsby 5 or Spring Creek Road.
So all of that can be worked out as we move forward.
Exactly.
And we may not concede to what it is that comes forward. So right now, we have an alignment that has been worked on by you and your consulting team. It's been here before council, committee and council in previous iterations, and we've given comment. As we move forward after tonight, it doesn't stop either the development community from talking and coming forward as a group to come forward after they've conceded all of what it is they want to do within their own group, and they can come forward and make application that we will work with them on.
That is correct.
I think that's a nutshell, right? So tonight, we have before us, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we have the decision that we can accept the proposal made by staff. Just a moment, please. I'm talking to my committee, and right now we finished with the public for a moment. This doesn't mean that the council or the committee can't ask for us to have more dialogue, but we have a document before us that we can accept, we can reject, or we can send back or allow for more public input or more communication between our members of staff and our members of the landowners community. That's the decision you have before you tonight. I'm just bringing it back up to this high level. You got a plan, you've heard about it, it's been going on for 2 years. So, you got 3 choices. Counselor, I saw Counselor, do we have a fourth? Oh, Counselor Rayner, I see your hand first.
Second, Madam Chair, that option about accepting the staff report, I'd like to propose that we vote on that now.
You're moving the question. Barring anyone having a burning issue before me, and those wanting, or someone wanting us to go back out and talk to that group out there,
Like I said, Madam Mayor, I respect staff,
that's okay.
the direction they're going in this forth, not that they're applying to this in the best interest of doing it right either. I would like to have the vote.
Okay, so I'm looking for burning issues. Now I'm going to look for a seconder to move the question. Counselor Bell has seconded Counselor Rayner's decision to move forward with the question. I'm looking for comments. Is it comment? Okay, last time you were voting. So, Mayor Joyner.
Well, you got yourself a first and seconder, so I don't need to vote on that. My question is to Mr. Treble is that in both plans, on both the south side of the tracks and the north side of the tracks, both developers keep wanting to put houses.
Mayor Joyner, we have a motion on the floor for the question.
Oh.
Non-discussion, yeah.
It's a non-discussion. I have to.
Oh, it was a call to question?
Yeah.
He wants to call a question. He seconded it.
Oh, okay. I'm
Sorry, buddy. I got 2 clerks here telling me we're out of order. So, well, that's true. Here, both of you can split over this. So we have a motion on the floor. We have a call on the floor to call a question. If that loses, we can talk until the cows come home. Okay? Great. All in favor? Oh, wait a minute. I don't have to ask for a motion on this. No? Okay. All in favor of calling the question?
Oh, yeah. Really?
Okay. Now I can call the question. The question on the floor is the staff report. You remember what it said? That motion was carried. I apologize. I've got the prompters here. So now, on the motion with regard to the secondary plan. All in favor? Well, the motion contained in your report, I'm sorry, I'm page 468 at the moment, but I'll go back to the agenda.
Page 5.
5?
Page 5.
The staff report that brought forward this whole secondary plan.
It's item P83.
Where is it? Thank you. Okay, item P8317 was a recommendation report for the adoption of the final secondary plan for the Northwest Quadrant. It was receive the report. The official plan amendment 45 be and hereby adopted by bylaw by the Township Council, followed by the provision of notice of adoption in accordance with the Planning Act. that the official plan amendment 45 consisting of the following text and map schedules constitute an amendment to the Township of West Lincoln's official plan as amended, and that implementation of the Northwest Quadrant secondary plan lands shall be by application for plan of subdivision, condominium, or site plan as appropriate. That's the motion that's on the table. It was moved and seconded way back, which allowed us to discuss it. I think it was Councillor Bilsma and Councillor Ganan. No? Oh, sorry, Mayor and Councillor Bell. Okay, so it's on the table, duly moved and seconded. Councillor Rayner, you have asked the question. That's the question on the table. So you either approve it, you vote against it, you send it back to staff, or you can decide you're going to bring it forward at a different meeting. But that's the item on the table. That's the staff recommendation. Are there any further discussions? Okay, the question has been called. All in favor? I guess that carries.
Yeah, move on.
Mayor Joyner is opposed as noted. Well,
I'm opposed, Madam Chair, because I wasn't allowed to ask my questions.
if that's what you'd like, but unfortunately, Councillor Rayner called the question. Okay? I understand.
I understand what happened. I can still be
You can be
against
opposed all
it.
you
Sure.
want. You're right. It comes to council on the 22nd. You can ask your questions there. Okay, you can overturn this all on the 22nd. We can do anything again on the 22nd?
26th.
Okay, it's the 26th. Our council meeting on the 26th.
Thank you. Safe journey.
We're going to take a 5-minute recess. I'm sorry, Doug. I just had the clerk bitching at me.
I'm not going to miss any.
All right, well, we'll be in touch.
Okay, sounds good.
We are. I said that 5 minutes.
That was fun.